Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
Um, and real quick, before we get started into this, there's going to be a lot of questions about the Santander project. Um, John brought me on as the COO for John Matone Global, and director of all the global coaching projects. So I'm going to be your focal point, your contact point for the Santander project. This next Friday, I've scheduled a time to meet with everybody again to really answer a lot of these questions. There's a lot of questions about how is the whole project structured, what's expectations around that. And so I will get to that on Friday. I just want everybody to know that, yeah, there's going to be a lot of conversation around that, and I will bring you up to speed. Also, before we jump into this MLEI today, I sent out a link earlier um, to everybody, letting you schedule some time with me, either as a cohort, which is suggested, or individually. If you would like to meet with me individually, that is fine. Some people don't want to do their MLEI in a in a group setting. I've already met with some of you on this call, so this week, and so if you haven't got on my calendar, I think I've seen several of you already schedule time with me, but please do that, and so we can walk through this individually. I want to debrief your MLEI with you so you understand a little bit more about your own as well. So let's jump right into this.
But Rich, the other thing is that that's not in that doesn't replace you working together with others.
Right. Exactly.
And that because when you go through it, it gives you a foundation and a guide. We really want you to practice with each other. So you're learning how to ask the questions. And especially down the road when we get into that 360 survey and you're pulling the threads and the leadership development plan and you're pulling the threads and putting things together, we want to make sure that you're having the opportunity to practice that.
Yeah. Yes, Claudia, you have a
Yeah,
question?
good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your time and everything, Rich and Sue. Just a quick question. Are we getting the slides available so we don't have to focus on that for this session?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they are all in
Yeah,
the the drive. Would you
okay.
like to follow along today? Is that what you're asking, or well, if you'll have them available for you?
Where I will have them available.
I'll
Yeah.
put
Yeah,
the
they'll be
link to
on
them.
the drive.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much. Thank you.
Okay, well, if everybody can see my screen here, and gonna move on. So this is, as Sue mentioned, we're gonna do all about the MLEI, this first portion of today. So jumping into this is one of the things that if you were on the level one call with John, he talked about what is the IL process? How does it work? There's four phases, which is the awareness phase, which is what the MLEI falls under. Um, and as far as awareness and assessments, awareness and assessment is where that falls under. Action and achievement. Just to let you know up front, the MLEI is only one of three that we're going to teach you. We're doing the MLEI today. There's a couple others, the CPI 260, and also the STLI 360. That together with the MLEI and those two are how we define the action plan, everything going forward. So the first thing is understanding and establishing those vision and goals with the client, right? And you'll be doing that those first calls, and that Sue's going to go over that today with the core purpose statement, which is something that even though we're talking about that MLEI first, we like to start with that core purpose statement, getting them started on that, and Sue will discuss that a little bit later. So the inner core assessment, this MLEI is what we term as an inner core assessment. It's based on the Enneagram, and it really looks at identifying your inner core strengths and gaps as they relate to your leadership skills, not personality. That's one of the things that a lot of people have got kind of mixed up with this, that this is a personality test. It is not a personality test. It is a leadership strengths and gaps test. Once we do the MLEI, then we come back with some outer core assessments, which is those two that I talked about, the CPI 260. We're also doing IOPT, what we call the IOPT in there, and also the STLI 360, which is really that perception-based 360 with their stakeholders, the stakeholders that they name. So once we get those three, and we take a look at all three of them together, that's when we establish what our development plan is going forward, which is this column here. We really start to look at what the development plan is, where we really need to leverage those gifts, address all those gaps, and work on what is going to be their masterpiece, if you will. What is everybody's masterpiece? What do we want to become? That's what we want to work on, is that ILDP, that Intelligent Leadership Development Plan, individual leadership development plan. Once we do that, there's going to be some other stakeholder engagement around what we have learned, engaging their stakeholders with meetings, having them address some things with their stakeholders, letting them know what their development plan is going to be. And then we use feedback, which is our Leader Watch survey, which is another thing that we're going to be talking to you about and teaching you how to use. The Leader Watch survey will be done at this the 6-month, the 9-month, and the 12-month time frames. That really is where we get the feedback from the same individuals that they have named in their 360. We go back to those same individuals to get the feedback on how they are progressing, how they're doing. That's where the ROI comes in of this process that we are doing. So let's move on. Any questions before we move on from this? I know John covered this quite a bit. And I can't see everybody's hand, so if you raise your hand if you have a question real quick before we move on. Okay. Moving on. One of the things that we want to impress upon you as we go through this is Steve Jobs. One of the things that he talked about was keep thinking different and thinking big. And when we talk about thinking different, so many of you have done different assessments, used different assessments in your coaching career. Using the IL process might be a little bit different than the process that you have done. So keep thinking different. How is this MLEI going to help me? How am I going to be able to incorporate these different philosophies, these IL philosophies? And think big, right? Let's think big. This is as you all know, John had the opportunity to become Steve Jobs' executive coach, and he started his journey with John with the exact same MLEI that we are talking about today. He's taken it. Several of the others that have taken it would be Bill Logue of FedEx, Roger Enrico of PepsiCo, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, several leaders around the world. So remember that this MLEI has been taken and started at the beginning of the journey with John or another IL coach based on this MLEI. Same thing that you took, identical assessment to the one that you took. So John Mattone's 50 Laws of Intelligent Leadership. Now, you all have the ability to download all these 50 laws for yourself. And law number 13 is nobody sees your inner core except you. And that's why we start here with this inner core. If you choose to see it, nobody sees your inner core except you if you choose to see it. That's part of that vulnerability decision that we talk so much about. And if you do choose to see it, this becomes the key to unlocking your true greatness. That's why we start at the inner core. That's why we start right here, who you are. So let's talk a little bit about the MLEI tool. So before we jump into this, let me ask, are there any questions so far on anything that I've said? I want to make sure that that we're okay.
Rich, there's one question that we're going to get to that Claudia asked, and it's, do you consider feedback ROI? But there's a very practical place for us to put that in there. So I have written it down to make sure when we get to that point, we address it.
Okay. Yes. Great question, Claudia. And yes, we will get to that. So the MLEI tool, it's called the Mattone Leadership Enneagram Inventory. And it's not so much a measure like I talked about before of a leader's personality, but it's more a measure of the leader's potential around their leadership strengths and gaps and activity and maturity, and respond to stress and disruption in a positive, mature, or negative, immature way. How do they respond to those strengths and gaps, either negatively or positively? And that's so if you measure who you are, it's therefore it's not a measure of who you are, but it's more of a leading indicator. Measures that predict a leader's can do and will do. It highlights a leader's gifts they need to leverage and the red flags they need to accept and address. So it looks at some series of 9 different areas that we're going to talk about in a minute. So I want to stop here, and I want to go into this in depth. This is what we call the wheel of intelligent leadership. And if you look at maybe this outer core, this outer ring, this is what we call the outer core, those areas that people see in us. Though you might see some of these things come up in perhaps a review, annual review, or maybe a 360. Everything that we talk about, the 360, is an outer core assessment. But we don't start there. These are inevitably those areas that we want to develop, but we don't start in those areas. We want to make sure that we start at the inner core of who we are. The inner core really is those self-concepts of how you were raised, all your environment, education, past business experiences, all those things that make you who you are, those things that make Joanna who she is, that make Claudia who she is, make Sue who she is. That's how we were raised. And from that, we have these elements of character. Those elements of character are things such as integrity, courage, resistance, humility, all those the things that make up our core values. Those in turn drive or influence these values, our beliefs, how we refer to things, our references. They also influence our thoughts. They drive our thoughts, our behavioral tendencies, and our emotions. One thing I want to do before I move on to this next ring, you can see these arrows pointing out. That does not mean that references and emotions simply impact this area, or thoughts and values impact this area. They impact all of everything we do in those different ways. So these rings, they can move. They're not static. They're not static for certain areas, but they influence everything that we do, our inner core, our emotions, how we behave, our beliefs, values, thoughts, references. Those in turn influence this outer core. So we look at 7 specific pillars when we start working through this. Pillar number 1 is that thinking different, thinking big we talked about. Number 2 is the vulnerability decision. That pillar number 2, that vulnerability decision, is a critical element. If you've read John's book, The Intelligent Leader, Intelligent Leadership, that there's 2 of them, the Intelligent Leader and Intelligent Leadership. The first thing that John talks about after thinking different and thinking big is that vulnerability decision. it's important for us to be vulnerable to those things that we're going to learn, to be open to things that we may not be aware of ourselves, that we need to change and we need to move going forward. This next one is that mindset of privilege versus duty. What is it more? We really want to focus on the privilege versus our duty. What is our duty? To lead people, to be effective leaders, to be those servant leaders, utilizing all those elements of our inner core, those things that we work on in pillar number 3. Pillar number 4 is leveraging our gifts and addressing our gaps. That's really one of those areas that once we do all those assessments, we are going to look at that leadership development, that leadership, leveraging those gifts, addressing gaps in order to build that individual leadership development plan. Pillar 5 is the courage to execute. This is one that you're going to see with a lot of your clients is they get to that point. We've developed that development plan. Now comes the courage. We have to execute this. We have to change who we are. We have to make all those effective changes in our life that are going to influence those people around us and leave a lasting legacy for ourselves. Being vigilant, being present, being in the moment, right? Making sure that once we've started this, and as coaches, that we can make sure that we're vigilant in our process. We're steadfast. We're present in the moment. We keep focusing on, the day to day, with a vision of the future. And course correction, right? We measure and we measure and we measure again. Leadership watch, that leader watch, all these other things, those things that we continue to measure throughout the process and course correct as we need to. Are we getting off course? Do we need to bring ourselves back? Do we need to take a look at what our elements of our inner core are? It's not just a one and done, right? It's something that we work on throughout our lives. Anything you want to add on this, Sue?
No, I think you're doing great. It is. I think the biggest thing, if I could add just the one piece, is that when you think of the core and what this image is, think of it as 3-dimensional. Really, if you were to flip it on your side, you could spin each one of them.
Yes.
It's moving and breathing. It's so hard to articulate visually, but it is all of the inner core informs the outer core.
Exactly. So thank you, Sue. So again, these are igniters of our leadership growth, right? The 7 pillars, they require to change our mindset, change our habits. That 1% better every day, right? Who's read Atomic Habits? Anybody here? Yeah, great book. I love Atomic Habits. Really talks about that 1% every day, why it's important to make sure our habits, we're focusing on our habits and improving ourselves constantly. And the inner core, required self-concept, our character values, our thoughts, emotions, beliefs. That is the foundation. And if we talk about this, I'm going to stop my screen for just a moment. One of the things about the MLEI, and we all know this, we all need a solid foundation, right? We need to know what our foundation is, where our base is, and make sure that that foundation is strong. If we don't have a strong foundation, just like in building homes, building buildings, anything, if there's not a solid foundation and a core foundation that's going to weather the storms, right? We'll be able to rely on who we are long term. Then everything else is going to be, it's going to be unstable going forward. That's why we really focus first on the inner core. All right, let me get back into this. Okay, so again, let me talk about this. We talked a little bit about the inner core. I want to explain this real quick. These are those strategic tactical competencies, this outer core, that inevitably we want to improve in our clients. We want to improve in ourselves. Critical thinking, decision making, strategic thinking, emotional leadership, communication skills, talent leadership, team leadership, change leadership, and driving for results. And again, this coming back to that inner core, each of these inner core concepts influence how we show up on those strategic tactical competencies, how well we are in our inner core or showing up to that outside. A lot of times you'll see these people look at these from the outside as maybe management processes or something that we do to run a business, where in reality we are looking at these as leadership skills, leadership talents. How do we use these to lead people? How do we use these? How does our inner core inform the outer core on leading people? Not specifically about managing a process. Managing processes and leading people are two different areas. So we were really focused in on how the inner core influences this outer core. So the MLEI is based on an Enneagram. The Enneagram is 2,500 plus years old. It's been used forever. Yes, Claudia.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute myself. Thank you. Sorry, before we go into the crossing with the Enneagram, would it be correct to say that the inner core, as I understand myself better, as I know myself better, will become and turn into patterns of behavior of the outer core? So
Yes.
basically, what I observe is their behavior as being part of their own strengths, values, and sort of like the iceberg. What you see and what you don't see.
It's a great analogy of that. That's exactly what that is.
Okay, good. Thank
Inner
you.
core is really, who we are. And
Mm,
how much are we allowing that inner core to be reflected in the outer core, our leadership skills? Yes, absolutely. That's what
Thank
people
you.
base on our inner core. Any other questions on that before we
Thank
move
you.
on? Okay.
Rich, while
Oh,
you're shifting over to that, I'd like to just make one quick comment that was requested in the chat for today. The goal that we have when we're doing multi-hour sessions is that at approximately the top of the hour, we take about a 5-minute break to grab something to drink, use the restroom, catch up with anything. And then when we get done with the MLEI, we'll take approximately a half hour. So you can, get a break, eat something, whatever. However, if collaboratively, easier to do than say, as a group, you'd prefer to take fewer breaks or longer breaks, please share with us, because we're not saying this is what it has to be. This is what we're suggesting. So it's on you as a group to guide us to do what supports you the best. Everybody good with that? Show thumbs up if you are. All right, great. Thank you.
all right. So this is what the Enneagram looks like laid over the top of the will intelligent leadership. You can see that on this side is those inner core traits that we're going to talk about so much today. Now, one of the things that we don't do, we don't get deep into the Enneagram. We simply use the Enneagram as a tool to get those areas that your strengths are in, your gaps are in. The Enneagram is a fascinating thing, and it's a very, very deep tool that has been used and it has been primarily used for personality tests. John, when he first was working on this, he changed this and utilized the Enneagram as a tool for the inner core, to look at the inner core leadership strengths and gaps, not personality. So, and you're going to hear me come back to that quite a bit, because there's a lot of, even this week with meeting some of the people, there's still that question of, is this a personality test? And it's not. So this is simply how the inner core traits impact those different areas on the outer core. The decision making, strategic thinking, where the inner core traits and values that we could be with that perfectionist, that moral decision maker, that perfectionist, how we make those decisions. The arbitrator, how we really develop those critical thinking skills based on our inner core. And I'm not gonna dive too much into that part of it right now. I suggest if you've all got the ebook, there's a lot more information in there on that. But I don't want to get lost simply on the Enneagram today. I'm just showing you how this lays over the top of this. And so if anybody here is into the Enneagram, I got fascinated with the Enneagram to the point where I teach a 12-week course with another coach on the Enneagram specifically, but that's not where we're going with this.
And Rich, another important point from the intelligent leadership side about the MLEI and the conversation about the Enneagram and what John's trying to do with assessments and everything. And we'll see this when we're talking about the comparison with other assessments. What he wanted to do is to have something that is a simple snapshot, that's not layer after layer after layer after layer. Some of these assessments are so robust that people get lost.
Yes.
Depth of the Enneagram, you get lost in. If there's so much education to prepare you to understand and things. What he wanted to do is make it very specific into the leadership side, into you and how you're from that component, which is why it's not represented as the Enneagram overall, that we make that distinction so that it's reasonable. This would be a subset of that, and that we're going to keep it straightforward and focused in here. So if people start asking, well, what about the rest of my everything like that? That's a broader application of the Enneagram. This is focused in this area. Does that make sense to everyone? And when you're talking about MBTI and the other things, that'll come out a little bit more, but it's an important distinction here so that no one gets overwhelmed.
All right. Thank you, Sue. Okay. And again, a Tone Leadership Enneagram inventory. And this is really how the Enneagram looks by itself. And it's just a map of leadership maturity is really what this comes down to. And again, we don't dive too deep into what this map does. We do to a smaller extent, but not a real deep dive. And when we get a little bit later on, even one-on-one, we can maybe jump further into what the Enneagram is, but just focus on the basics now. That's what our goal is here. And again, sorry, coming up, this is what that map looks like, with the arbitrator being number 9, that perfectionist, helper, entertainer, artist, thinker, disciple, activist, driver. Those are the 9 traits, and again, our arbitrator. Those are the 9 traits that every single one of us exhibit. We all exhibit on our inner core each and every one of these traits. And so when we talk about, I gotta familiarize myself with this slide, Sue. So again, it talks about our maturity. We talk about maturity based on each of these individual traits. Are you a role model? That's one of the things we really look at. What are you mature in each one of these areas? So we look at 2 different scales. The MLEI has 2 different scales. And I'm going to stop right here for just a minute. I need to see by the raise of hands, how many of you have taken the MLEI, the link that I send out? Okay. And if you got your camera off, please give me a hands up or something on there. Okay. So if you have not, let us know. We will make sure we get that link to you. Because that's really important for you to understand not only your own, but to have that time that we can debrief this with you. Okay. Amelia, do you have a question, or was that just a thumbs up on that? Okay, all right. Okay. So the MLEI has 2 scales. If you look at your report, it's going to have, first one is how active you are. That's this, it says scores at the top of how active you are. That's your activity. This is how you naturally are active based on your inner core, based on a scale, which it goes from 0 to 60, how active you are in these areas. That is how you naturally show up, your natural preferences for leadership. The next one is going to be how mature you are, your maturity around these things. And the maturity is based on how well you can utilize that skill, or are there some areas that are those derailing areas. Maturity. Another term that I like to use, that I talk to everybody about, this is not simply maturity, but confidence. You can look at it, confidence. There's other terms for this, but maturity simply doesn't mean are you that mature person. It means how those traits show up, how well you've been able to define them, how well you can use them in different types of things like crisis and leadership crisis, or different types of leadership styles, or things that you need to be, whatever that might be with those different leadership traits. But, or versely, it is how well you're not functioning there. So it's really an element of how well you function, or how dysfunctional in some of those elements of the activity it is. And we're going to jump into that, explain that more as we get into this. So, first things first, we are going to use this report. And this is the same report that you all got. And it comes out as your scores. 29, the helper, it'll talk about the helper, the different scores, 32, 34. That's how active you are in each and every one of these elements. The maturity ratios. Maturity is based on, it can go from a -8 to a +8. 0 and above being more the mature areas. 0 and below is where you're really derailing. The closer you get to 0 on the positive side is where you're really starting to derail. Some of those areas, it might be some derailer characteristics. So you've all should have received this report. If not, and if you took the MLEI and didn't get this report, let me know, because it was all used on my link, my personal MLEI link, so I can make sure that you do have that. I've gotten every one of you that have taken the MLEI, I've got your results as well. You should have got your results, and I have your results. So if you don't have those, let me know, and I can make sure I get those to you. Everybody have those that's taken it? Okay, good.
Lots of good hands up. All right.
Yep. This, I got to tell you, for everybody here, it's nice to have this smaller group. The last group, I think there was, I don't know how many, there's 70 or so. In Tuesday, there's a lot of people. So having this smaller group is, we can maybe address some of your questions more easily. So based on this, I hope, does everybody have their report with them now, or have it where you can see it? Because we're going to be using that in just a minute. I want you to follow along with me on something. So we are going to go next, and how. Let me talk about this. It's going to talk about your profile, your predominant traits, your maturity, and then we based on these, we do those development strategies. But we look first at who you are. Your profile is really based on a combination of your traits, your maturity, and then we develop those strategies based on first looking at who you are. What's your strengths? What's your gaps in the MLEI? So I'm going to stop. I'm going to change my screen, because I'm going to pull up the actual spreadsheet. Now, before, just a moment. I sent this out to everybody. I want to make sure everybody has this. Does everybody have this spreadsheet that I send out, this template? Okay. Because if you can, follow along with me, and you can enter your own scores. Before we get into this, let me make sure I pull this up. Okay, there we go. Again, I have learned from everybody that instead of maybe decimal points, it's commas in here for different parts of the world use different things. So can you see this spreadsheet now that I have, this Excel spreadsheet? Thumbs up. Okay, all right. We are going to use a sample, which is, and I'm going to show you the sample first here. We're going to use a sample that is BN. We're going to use that, just the initials BN for this. Can everybody see this report? Okay, we're going to use these scores to populate that spreadsheet. So let me go back to the spreadsheet. And let me come back to why we developed this spreadsheet. We wanted to make this an easier process to not only understand, but to debrief for your clients. I started using this, putting this together some time ago, and because I'm a more visual guy, I want to be able to show and explain these kind of more in a linear method versus trying to just bounce back and forth on the report. So Sue and I have worked pretty extensively on this. What's the easiest way to do this for our coaches that is not overwhelming, that is not something that is difficult to do? It's a very simple process. So first and foremost, so any questions before I get onto that? Any questions at all? Okay, and I can't see everybody's hands or anything. So if no questions, let's push forward.
You've got a great question, but it's something we'll do in a little bit. So not right now for this.
Okay, all right. So first and foremost, you're going to put your client's name in this particular thing, sample. This person's name is sample. Now you can't see the report, so I'm going to just populate this based on what I am seeing. So the first thing is we're going to start entering the scores under activity, which is 26. Entertainer is 44. Artist is 35. Thinker is 40. Disciple is 37. Activist is 38. Driver is 47. Arbitrator is 45. And perfectionist is 42. So that's how we enter those under what's called your scores. And it follows along with exactly how the scores are printed out on your report. Next thing, and this is where that I have been shown that if you don't use decimal points in wherever it might be, you change that to a comma. I don't know how someone did it the other day really quickly. So, but anyway, I'm going to walk through this. So we enter these as if it's not the comma or it's a decimal point, it's just 0.4. And that will populate here is at 0.4. So 0.467, 0.433, 0.267, 0.433, 0.267, 0.167, 0.367, and then 0.4. So those are the maturity ratios. If you look down below that on your report, it's going to have an average maturity ratio. That populates on the next on the scorecard. So there's no place to enter that right here, but that populates automatically. So let's go to this column. This is the important column after entering all these things. We need to really take a look at these scores and enter these acronyms. So the first one we are going to do, and before, let me stop for just a minute. Is everybody following along? Everybody got this okay?
Rich, one of the things that a question came up is that someone doesn't have the most current version of it. So at a
Well,
break, maybe you can attach the spreadsheet link for them. I know it's also in the Google Drive folder, but if you can maybe just attach the file into our chat, that would be great.
I will do that right now as we speak.
Or
So,
so good. And I think everybody will give you a nice thumbs up for that. There we go. Beautiful. We like the thumbs up.
okay. Thank you. Hold on just a moment. I've got to um
And that's the version that's up in the Google
Yeah.
Drive folder, correct?
yes, it should be the version that and if it's not, we'll put it there.
Okay.
But
Use the one that Rich gives you for now. I know we just made a couple changes to it yesterday. So use this one, and then by Monday, know that the Google Drive folder will also be reflective of the most current version.
all right, I just had to make a change here. I couldn't attach it while it was open, so I had to save it for something.
Wow. By the way, as he's doing that, we
There we
learned
go.
something yesterday.
Okay, you should have that now.
Very large folders are often difficult to transfer. I sent him a file that was over 30 megabytes while we were on Zoom, and Zoom attached it. So a workaround, if you've got a very large file and you're trying to share it with someone, could also be to set up a Zoom session and send it through the chat of Zoom.
Yeah.
So we were both surprised. Rich said, "Well, why don't you try attaching?" And I said, "It's 30 megabytes." Well, actually, it was almost 31 megabytes, and it attached. So here you go. Learn
Yeah,
something new every day and pass it on within 24 hours. It's my
Yep.
motto.
So learn something new. I'm 60, so that was something, got to learn something early. So or still learning, maybe teaching an old dog new tricks, right? Okay. Let's move on now. So does everybody have that? Everybody have that current version of awesome. Okay. Now let's come back to this where we were at. And once you've entered all of these scores, the activity and the maturity, we're going to identify those areas on here that are their strengths and gaps based on these scores. Now, when we work with our client, we don't want to, eat the whole elephant all at once, right? We want to focus in on just a few areas, a couple areas that are critical to helping our clients understand what we're going to be focused on moving forward. Where are their strengths and gaps based on their inner core, based on the way they answered these questions. So the first one is going to be that predominant leadership trait. And if you look down here in the notes a little bit on what that is, that's based on the highest activity. So if we look through here, that predominant leadership trait based on how you naturally show up, what you've naturally developed as your strongest trait is going to be that driver for this sample. So we're going to put in here PDL. The next one we are going to look at is we're going to switch over to the maturity column. Looking at maturity, we're going to look through here and we're going to find out what is the highest maturity in this area. The one that shows up here on this sample is the highest maturity would be that entertainer, which is 0.467. Does everybody see that? Everybody following along there? Okay, so there I'm going to put in an N and MM. Now this next one's a little bit trickier. Not so much in the sense of what we're going to be looking for, least mature, but in this case, if you look here, this least mature trait is also their predominant. Now, this isn't going to be the same on everybody's, but in this sample, it is that not only is their predominant leadership trait, the one that they use the most, it's also their least mature. We're going to talk about that here in just a few minutes, why that can be the case and what happens in that instance. If it were something else, say, for example, this was like 0.033. I'm going to change this perfectionist real quick. That then would become their least mature, not this one. Can you see where, can you follow along? Can you see where I'm going with this? We always go regardless on the maturity, it can, and that can match up, and the most mature or least mature can match up with what their predominant leadership style is. And that's okay. That's okay. We walk through those in the next area. But since the sample is such that it is the driver on here, Sue, should I leave it just like that for explaining it going forward? I think.
Well, what we want to make sure is where we have, yeah, just exactly like that. What we want to do is we want to have the clarity on that because what you see in that opportunity is the gap of it. That one of the leadership things that we talk about is you're using something extremely actively. It's the most active. You're using it a lot. It's the least mature. And when we talk about derailing and when we talk about leadership styles, this is a huge indicator that you may not be using it in as healthy a way as you possibly could. So when it's not mature, it means that you have the opportunity to become healthier in the way that you're using it and get to the reason why you might be using it a lot, but not in a healthy way. So these are the data points that are the inflection points for us to be asking questions to learn why.
Yes. So let's do this. It is almost the top of the hour. And before I go on further and get into the scorecard and start walking through that, let's take a quick break. Even though it's a couple minutes to the top of the hour, let's take a quick break and we'll come back in, 5 minutes?
Yep. So it's about 8:57 Eastern time. So about 9:02.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to pause the recording.
Okay. Into the scorecard. Any questions about what we just did on that? Good.
And actually, what you may want to do is Claudia's most recent question about, is this what we'll be doing with each of our individual clients?
Yes, let me stop there. Yes, you will. You're going to be entering each of your clients' information into that area that I just showed. Now, I want to back up and talk a little bit about maybe some of the other assessments you've seen that might populate and put this big report out for everybody. We have been a very boutique organization where the MLEI, we do these things one-on-one based on, and there used to be another report that came out. In the future, that might be the case, but since we're doing these individually one-on-one type reports, we created this, Sue and I worked on this spreadsheet, created this so it's an easy way for you to enter your information, and once it populates a scorecard for you to walk through that information with your client, utilizing not only a scorecard, but that interpretive guide ebook that I sent to everybody as well.
And then this leads to the answer to Claudia's other question about the fact that the report currently comes directly in the body of the email. What I encourage you in the instructions when they're going to be taking the MLEI to use your email so the report comes to you. And it comes to you for several reasons. The first reason is then that you're able to take the information, which is data points, and you're able to put it into this spreadsheet to give you a place to have a conversation. The second reason that I do this is I don't ever want them seeing their own MLEI first because they judge it. We all judge it. We look at the numbers immediately and we judge ourselves. And there's Their data. The data has context to it. We want them to be open to learning the context behind it because it's absolutely reasonable that there may be places where either they're not mature at all or they're not very active. And so we want to get to the what's underneath it. Well, when they've already looked at the numbers and judged themselves, then they're not looking at it in a healthy way. So we either introduce them to the MLAI through, for example, BN, through any one of them. You could use yours, anything else other than theirs. Same exact conversation with the 360. We don't want them looking at their 360 first because they'll do the same thing, they'll judge it. So we want them to be in the healthiest place, to be open to be exploring the reasons why, which are very reasonable. Okay. So when you're giving it, and it's your choice, you can have it go directly to them and go with that. Some coaches do. I prefer to have them be in a very positive place of learning how to maximize the potential of the opportunity with this great gift, and then get to the context underneath why their numbers are the way they are, so they're open to the potentials and possibility. Does
Yes.
that make sense to everyone? Okay, good. We got Roberto who's gave us the good thumbs up. All right. So that I think that is, Claudia, does that answer your questions? Is that okay? And good for everyone? Okay, very good. All right. Back to you, Rich.
All righty. And to Sue's point on this, and I'm sure some of you have looked at your report and thought, oh my gosh, I'm a poor leader. I'm a bad guy. I'm a bad girl. This is really, some of these areas I'm just, where have I screwed up in my life? Those sort of things. You're going to have those issues. Matter of fact, the last time, Tuesday and Wednesday, had one of the individuals on Wednesday when we went through this MLEI was very upset about his scores. And so needing to walk them through them. These are not good scores or bad scores. Okay. That's not where we're looking at here. And so back to Sue's point, if you let your client see this too long before you have a chance to debrief it with them, they're going to have these preconceived notions that now you've got to talk them off the edge, all these sort of things. And you don't want to do that because this is not good or bad. It simply is.
And they don't know that.
Yeah.
You don't want to start, if you have them see it first, then they take all of their judgment and all of the other things. And if you look at like the Likert scale, which is -5 to +5 or -7 to +5, if you start at 0 with that, when they get their report and they judge themselves, they're going down to here. For the longest time of what you're doing with their MLEI is you're just trying to get them back to neutral before you can go there. I want to teach them. I want them to understand the power and the capability of it, so they're excited about what they're going to be seeing and the potential of it. So they start from 0 and go forward, recognizing these are gifts they're being given. This is not a judgment thing. And if we do it with someone else's that they're not associated with, there's that thing about associated versus disassociated. You're not associated with somebody else's. You could go look at them and go, okay, what else? So you're in a position where you can learn with someone else's because you're not attached to it. Then when you see yours that you're associated with, you understand that there are questions. It's reasonable. Some of these might be this way. And what a great gift to learn that you've got so much potential to be able to do something else. That in the beginning, you wouldn't know any of those things. And then you would feel like, oh, she's just trying to make me feel good. I'm really bad. She's just trying to make me feel good. So you got to go through all that quote unquote head trash to get them back. So get to do whatever you choose, but this is why I don't have them see that. I'll go through the MLEI interpretive report and I'll go through the MLEI pieces with someone else before I introduce theirs. So just an option for you. Okay, Rich, back to you.
Scorecard. Let's go to the scorecard here. Now, once you've entered all that information, it's going to populate this scorecard. Now, if you noticed on where you enter the data, you start with the helper. That's where the helper, that's how the report comes out. That's how Qualtrics has populated this report for us. However, we've changed this so on the scorecard, so it goes style number 1 through 9. So it's in order. beginning at 1, and which is the perfectionist, and how that lines up with the interpretive guide ebook. Does that make sense? Okay. So how I explain this to my clients is I start with this, letting them know this is the style number based on the Enneagram. And this is the trait associated with the Enneagram, starting in that perfectionist, the helper, the entertainer, artist, thinker, disciple, activist, driver, and arbitrator. Those 9 inner core traits that we all have. The leadership functionable skills here in column D is the perfectionist is really those areas of ethical standards and responsibility. You can find all that information in the interpretive guide ebook starting on page 21. And this is something that Sue and I we just put this together, what, a week or so ago, Sue?
We've
Wanting
worked on
to-
it for several months and then finalized it, yes.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that it's easy for you to understand and it's easy for your client to understand as we and give them a reference point where they can go into that interpretive guide ebook. So just to back up, when you send this report to them, and I always send it maybe at the very most just a couple hours before we meet. Matter of fact, if we meet early in the morning, I'll send it to them the night before. Or if it's during the same day, just a few hours before, just to let them look through it and give, suggestions on the interpretive guide ebook, maybe start reading through some things. But you will send both this report and the interpretive guide ebook to your client at the same time. So that's why we've put in here where they can start reading about these different traits. Helper, empathy and altruism, that's those functionable skills. Entertainer is really that self-esteem, self-development skills. The artist, self-awareness and artistic creativity.
And by the way, Rich, to the point of what we were talking about earlier, we've
Yes.
created one of these using BN so that when you're sending it to them, you're not sending them. If you choose to send them theirs, you can. But if you want to send BN so they're not seeing theirs and they're just looking at it from an educational perspective, we've created the version that is BN.
Okay, so thank you, Sue. Thinker, mental focus and expert knowledge. Disciple, trust and perseverance. Activist, the functional skills of spontaneity and diverse activity. Driver, that self-assertion and leadership. Receptivity and interpersonal mediation. Now down here at the bottom, you'll see how the average maturity scores, and I'll talk about that. I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself on that, but this is where the scorecard is. Also going to give you some glossary of terms down below. I'll change this. I used to have preferred dominant style, least preferred. We're not doing that right now, and so I'll have to go in and change that for you, but don't disregard these color codes for now. So once we do that, then I get into the columns here. Activity. This is how you naturally show up, your activity, how your natural preference in that inner core. Yes, did you have a question?
I think I need to mute everybody. Hang on a minute.
Yeah. No problem.
Okay, you're good. Oh, wait a minute. I'm going to unmute you. Unmute yourself, Rich. Okay. Unmute.
Here we go.
There you go.
So activity. And before I move on, before I get into activity and maturity, are there any questions about this part of the scorecard? I can't see everybody's hand, so if you do, just raise your hand or whatever. Throw up a.
The spreadsheet, Claudia said the spreadsheet we got is already synced with the formulas to bring the results.
Yes. Yeah. So, and yeah, you can see that they have, I've created the formula is based on the previous page. So you don't have to.
The old wizard created the formulas behind it all.
No.
So
Claudia.
yeah, just briefly, just on that point, because I'm filling out mine and it doesn't come up with the results on the BN sample that you share with us. My results. I'm filling in my results to get the MLI scorecard filled out or populated,
Okay.
and it doesn't show up. So I was just wondering.
What are you filling out? Maybe you can.
The first, the one in yellow at the bottom, the
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. So I filled it out with my results,
Okay.
and it didn't populate the second one.
Didn't populate this. It didn't populate this
Right.
at all.
Correct.
Because this is the exact same one I sent you, just without the numbers in it. That's interesting.
Yeah, just for you to know, it may not be coordinated or something.
Can you share your screen?
Yes.
I want to see what you're talking about. If we let her share her screen, Sue, so we can see what she's
You'd be able to, yeah, let me go ahead and there you go.
yeah.
I still can't.
You should be able to. It says it's
Now I can. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So let me get that. Where is it? Here. Okay, so these are my results.
Okay.
I enter
all
each
right.
one of them,
Yeah.
right? And then this is
Oh, so are you entering on the spreadsheet?
yeah,
Okay, go back to the MLAI data entry.
that's where I am. Here.
Yeah, go there. There. Okay. So, and you're talking about the strengths and gaps aren't populating?
No. I'm assuming I may be wrong that these activity maturity columns should populate somewhere here, right?
They do, right there, under
Okay.
activity and maturity.
Okay, so it's coordinated because the numbers were very so similar to the sample that you sent that I thought that is weird.
Yeah, and so here's yeah, they were similar to the sample, a BN sample. So,
Mm.
okay, yeah, just go back and let me hold on just a minute. Give me
Because
just a moment. Sue, if you want
sure.
to talk to him for just a minute, I might need to send him I want to make sure you have the correct copy.
It's the
okay.
one you sent via email. That's the one I opened. And I'm
Oh, the
using.
one you sent versus okay.
Yeah, not the one that you open here on the chat. No.
Okay, not the one I opened on the chat. All right, so use the one that I just sent on the chat a few minutes ago. Use that one.
Okay.
Use that one. We had sent a sample previously.
Yes.
Use the one that I just sent on the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Okay,
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Yes,
All
I
right.
put the one in the chat and that makes the connection, by the way.
Very good. Excellent.
All right.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And thank you, Christine.
Yes,
Very good.
thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so coming back to this, activity is how you naturally show up. So that's going to populate under this column. And again, it's going to be in connection with how you enter those. Maturity ratios, again, that is going to be that column that shows how, if you want to really explain this, it's how well you are either being able to function in that specific area of that activity, whether it's a strength, whether it's a gap, whether you're struggling, you're very effective in utilizing that type of leadership trait, or it's an area that you are struggling with, and not specifically struggling with, but maybe just small parts of that. And I'm gonna show you exactly what I mean here in just a minute. It could not be the whole thing, but maybe just small elements of that are causing you to derail. But that is the maturity ratio. And the maturity levels here is, it corresponds with what's over here. Here's the thing you're going to see. And some of you have this on your maturity levels. This is neither good nor bad. It doesn't mean you're good. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you've got, you know, horrible leadership potential, or, oh my gosh, I'm seeing some derailer potential. I'm a coach, or even below zero, maybe a negative number. That does not mean you're bad in that area. It simply means there could be some areas that are causing you to derail. Not that you're a bad leader or a good leader. Simply, this is areas that we want to look at to start that path, right? Strengths and gaps. Where do you mostly show up? How strong are you? What areas do we need to develop? And so when you see things like this, some derailer potential, some of you may think and see this, or your client's going to see this, and they're going to think, oh my gosh, I'm bad. Or it's going to say significant derailer potential. That is not what that means. It doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means this is the starting point that we look at. This is who you are on your inner core. Doesn't mean that you know. And people look at this saying, "Well, I'm a great perfectionist. I'm not a perfectionist. I have these ethical standards." Absolutely, and for the most part, you probably do, with maybe a couple elements thrown in there. And I'm going to get into that here pretty significantly here in just a few minutes. So Christine, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning, looking at these maturity ratios. I had a real tough time from my coach brain, and I don't know if anyone else had this as well, answering these maturity questions when I took the assessment. Because, after doing this for so many years, we all have some experience with
Sure.
having derailers, but also managing them. So
Yeah.
I answered them as if, I just assumed, like, well, what is my default natural state, assuming I had no other skills? So
Yeah.
I don't know, like, so when I got my maturity scores back, I didn't really take it very personally because I was like, oh yeah, that's just,
Yeah.
without any other skills or practice, that's, I guess, how I would normally show up. So I don't know if that's just my lens of how I'm looking at it. I kind of want to, one, check in, is that an accurate way for me to even think about this? And two, is that a helpful tool as we debrief clients?
Very good question. Is that an accurate way to really look at this, as looking at this as those leadership skills? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, like, because I kind of like before I had any like
Yeah.
coaching skills, emotion, you know what I mean? Like I kind of figured out how is my, like, I don't know, my larva version of myself before I evolved with a
Okay.
lot of the things that John talks about.
Great question. This is how I tell everybody to answer this when I send it out, the link out to them. Answer this as you are now, not how you want to become, not what you were before. Look at this from a very honest standpoint and answer these questions as you are right now. Right now. Because if you try to go back and say, well, this is who I used to be, so I'm gonna answer it how I used to be, that's gonna give maybe a false depiction of where you are right now, even though where you were, where you've come from, has probably evolved. So that's the way you answer that, and going back and looking through that is fine. But my suggestion is taking the MLEI, answering how you are right now, each one of those questions. Yes, Joanna, you got a question.
Yes. Thank you. First of all, I just appreciate you being up at dawn, before dawn. Can I just say, I noticed
Oh,
now have daylight out there.
yes, it's getting, yes, the sun's starting to come up.
Is there any advice about when to do it? Because we know from research that if you take something when you're really tired, or even there are moments in the day when you can look at something and then you can come back to it at another time and you've seen it in a different way. We know that from research. So you could do this at the end of your day when you're really worn out, and I think probably have a different set of answers than if you did it fresh in the morning. I'm just curious if you've noticed the importance of that?
You know, that question has been brought up to me before. And my advice on that is do not look at this as a personality.
Okay.
Don't look at this as a personality assessment. We're not looking at your personality. We look at it simply through the lens of leadership, how you show up as a leader. And so I've had that question posed to me before, and honestly, I don't know that I have an answer for that. What, time of day is best for you, mornings,
Share what I've
evenings,
said.
you know.
Yeah,
So,
I'll share what I've said from that. Uh, what I do is I ask a series of questions to them. What we want them to do is to be in their best position to be answering. My thing is answer it less from a place of judgment than a place of where you are right now. And because to Rich's point, so what I'll have them do is I'll say, where are you? What time of if it's a time of day or if it's an environment where if you're really feeling stressed or things have been challenged at work and you're not really clear or things like that, it's where are you in the healthiest frame of mind for yourself to be able to say, here's where I am now, and I'm okay that everything's not okay. I'm okay with saying, I prefer this or this or that. I'm okay with that. So I get them into, yeah, and I understand the thing on the time of day. I know for me, my best time of day to be able to have the capacity to respond to something like that is in the morning. It's a both and it's and when I'm in a place where I can see myself most clearly. The thing we want to make sure we're helping them do is to say, don't do this from a place of judgment. This is not a judgment. This is not a good or a bad. It's an is thing. And so whatever context that supports you with that, there's not one right answer with it.
yeah. Right. There, does that help, Joanna?
Yeah, no, because I mean, I did mine when I was actually a little bit sick, and I'm just wondering how that would have
Oh,
impacted.
I was wondering why your results were the way they No, no, that's a good question, and that really is a good point. And I'm glad that Sue has pointed that out. I have not explained it that way. When's the best time of the day to take this? Just from don't look at it as a personality, and not a judgmental. So that's Sue. I appreciate that. That's we learn something every day, right? And how do we coach? How do you define things to your client? What's that art and science around this tool? What's your recommendation? And based on how you took it too, you're going to have those recommendations for others, right?
Yeah, and if I could just share one more, I was actually surprised that it actually said which trait the questions were referring to. So
Yeah.
I was influenced by the fact that I'm now going through some questions about helper. I'm now going through some questions about entertainer. I think somehow that I was curious about why you put the name there and you just don't have a whole bunch of questions you brought
That's a
out.
very good question. Fabioli, I'll get to you just a moment. Very good question. In a lot of different assessments, there's always those cross-checking questions, right? You see, throughout the assessment, it's going to ask, similar questions that cross-check each other. In this one, there is no cross-checking. It is specific. Those answers that you're given, the questions and the answer you're given are going to be specific to that trait that it shows. There are those 9 different areas, right? And so each section is focused on that one area: helper, perfectionist. So there's no cross-checking. So if you're taking it as something that, yeah, I've got to keep in mind how I answered this question previously, that's not the case. Answer it specific to that element.
And in complement to that, what you're going to see when we get into the 360. So when we're looking at the questions in the 360 for the 9 outer core competencies, just like for the MLEI, where the questions were created specifically, and John's a psychologist, I mean, and he worked with a team of people, that this was created, that those are specific and unique to that particular trait. When you get to the STLI 360 and you have the 9 outer core competencies, the exact same model is used, that there are 8 questions, specific and unique questions to that outer core competency. It's not the same 8 questions asked for each of the outer core competencies. So the goal of what it is to get clear and specific on that. Now, to your point, when you're looking at it, it's like, oh, okay, but you don't necessarily even know what the helper is yet. So we've had some people have said, I'd prefer not to know what trait it is because then I'm trying to second guess myself, but I don't really know what the trait is, so I don't really know how to do it, versus just going ahead and taking it. So yeah, and other people have wanted to know. So it's like, you know, some people want to know which trait is the questions are, and some people don't.
Okay. Thank you, Sue. Fabiola.
Yes, thank you. So in the same topic, I did my test in English and Spanish, and I have some differences in between those of them. I don't know if that is a translation thing, or maybe I am different when I speak in English and I am different when I'm Spanish. So that's one of the things that we might see, because our clients will receive, or if not, if we decided to receive ourselves, the result is in English, even though if I answer in Spanish, the result is in English. That's one thing. And the other thing is that I practiced with the Enneagram as a leadership tool for quite a while with Mario Sikora methodology. And I noticed my tendency during the test to reaffirm what was my tendency in that methodology. So part of what I think it's important to share with our clients is, if they know something about Enneagram, to put that aside just as some information, because this is new. What I'm doing now is that I'm unlearning something to be open to grow. And that's important, to have those experiences being differentiated.
And that's I do explain, you know, some of those things to the client before they take it. Look at it as individual. Don't worry about cross-checking, you know, questions. Look at it as answer this specific to that, those questions that are being answered. And I want to address something too you just said, very interesting, because we've been dealing with this for the last couple of weeks, is the translation. So we had someone else do the same thing. They took it in English, they took it in Spanish. They speak Portuguese. They're not really familiar. They understand the English, but the translation for them was different. So they were concerned, why are my results so different? So we actually got with them, we pulled up the results out of Qualtrics. And yeah, they had answered all of the questions differently based on maybe, you know, their understanding of either English or Spanish. That being said, we're having people work with this now to make sure the translation is correct. And either from, and so we're looking at these from, you know, we've never really done these outside of English. I'll be honest with you. No matter where we do these globally, it's always been in English. And so this concept of is are we missing out on the translation? Yeah, we've that's just been raised to us. And so we're going through that now. Matter of fact, we've got some folks helping us in not only Portuguese, but Brazilian Portuguese as well. Yeah, so we're looking at these from a different lens and stuff. So, okay.
And if you need some help, please let me know. I was part of the translating group that helped ICF with the core competencies to be more specific.
And absolutely, here's the thing. If we're as a John Matone group, we, you know, John talks about this, we're family, right? Let's help each other understand how this all works. It's not, you know, there could be some, you know, some differences in there that you find that we have missed. Please let us know, or Qualtrics has missed. Thank you to whoever wants to help. Absolutely. We're more than open and welcome you as helping us get better, right? What's going to be best for you? You know, we're all coaches. We've all coached different people. What has been best practices, you know, and some of the things that you've seen. So absolutely. There was another question I saw pop up.
Yeah, it was
Somebody-
just me very briefly, but I was going to support Viola's suggestion. I'm
Yeah.
also an interpreter and a translator, so if there's any help I can provide, because as LATAM, Spanish is very different,
Yeah.
you know, and especially in the Southern Cone. It's very
Yes.
different
Yeah.
from Mexico, it's very different
Sure.
from Spain. And words matter a lot to us because we come from an ontological view. So also there's more bias and also assessment behind language. So that
Right.
may or may not be relevant for what you want the outcome to be as a tool, you know. So
Right.
please feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to help.
This
Thank
is
you.
so exciting for
Yes.
us because as we continue, and especially there's so many gifts of the Santander project, and this is one of them, is that because we are now really from a global perspective, we want to make sure that we're as respectful and honoring all the different parts of the world that are there. So for you to lean in and to support us is incredible. Would you both do a great gift and just send us an email? I've written your names down, but if anybody would be interested in being part of the translation based on the language, the native language you have, would you be so gracious to send, at least to send to Rich, an email about that so that we can, because we literally did the other day, it took what, a couple hours, Rich, to redo the Portuguese one.
Yes. Yeah.
Doesn't take long.
It doesn't take long. So we're, yeah, definitely thank you for your help. And if I were to look at that in Spanish, the only words I know in Spanish probably aren't really appropriate to bring up with this group, or you know, likewise. So reading through there, I could read through and maybe understand a little bit of it, but any help. So I'm not the guy to be doing this. So, but thank you very much.
Yeah. thank
Okay,
you.
let's jump back into this. And where are we at on time?
It is
Okay.
9:37 Eastern time.
Okay.
So
So once we get through these areas, one of the things I'm going to point out to you as coaches right now, and I'm going to give you a suggestion. Before we get into the strengths and gaps right here, I'm going to come down to this average maturity ratio. This is how the average of all the maturity ratios are, and it shows overall how well you're functioning on your inner core as a leader. One of the things that I am going to suggest you take this out. Now I've got this in there, but this becomes that comparative issue, and the database that we have. So this is kind of a comparative on that whole global scale where it sits. And so one of the things that people see this is I'm a good. Does that mean I'm a good leader? Does that mean I fall on the lower scale? I'm not as good as others. Take that out. Okay, I'm going to suggest that right now because when I get into explaining this to some of the people that I've explained this to, I want to keep them focused on the results. I don't want them to go focus on how I compare to others. This becomes that comparative issue. So my suggestion to you, yeah, this is a very interesting statistic, but does it mean good or bad? No, it's neither here nor there. It doesn't matter. The other thing I want to explain to you all right now is these bell-shaped curves. And John talked about this earlier. This is based on activity, not maturity. So globally, if you look at the database, there are two areas that are the lowest activity-wise: helper and artist. And so we see if you draw that bell-shaped curve from, one end being 12, the other end being 60. And so if the artist is the median there is 31, how do you compare? There's that compare word again. How do we fall under these? Same with the helper is, the global mean on activity with the helper is 29. And with all of the others, it is 36. If you add all the other 7 traits up and average those out, it becomes 36. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is information that John has shared with you, the information that I share with you. You may choose to show your clients that. I do not. I do not. And for everybody that I've had this conversation with this week, my suggestion there is avoid that, okay? Because now we're getting into comparisons again. It's an interesting statistic, and if you show them that, they're going to switch gears. They're going to want to know, well, what's the statistics behind this? What's the science behind this? Where do you get the data behind this? Claudia.
Yeah, two questions. First of all, I totally support what you're saying because I've had a lot of engineers as clients, and they're much better at reading this than I am, but they don't have the content. So obviously numbers matter a lot to them. So if I don't know, and if I cannot have a very secure standing on what I'm giving them, I just don't go there, because the most important thing, as you said, is the other aspect.
Exactly. So if you can't explain the science behind that,
Right.
you're going to get lost in the weeds
Yeah.
with debriefing this with your client. This is just my suggestion. If you feel comfortable showing them this, that's up to you. What I have seen in the past, when I show them those bell-shaped curves, what happens, they tend to focus on those numbers.
Yeah.
Well, this is how I'm comparing. Why do I compare there? Versus it's not a comparison how you compare to others. Those are simply some of the statistics, some of the science behind this. So if you feel comfortable explaining that, do it. If not, I suggest don't, because in all the experience I've had with this, I don't want them going to the comparative side. I want to just simply show them where they are at. Does that make sense? And that's coming from me. So Sue, you had a comment around that.
Yes. What we're going to be learning as we go through all of intelligent leadership is there are layers of education and development. And so in the beginning, what we want to do is, to Rich's very, very valuable point, meet them where they're at. They don't need to know those things yet. As they begin to become more mature, as we've explained this, and then we get into the 360 and they're pulling the threads, and they've got, because the difference between data and context is data is something that you could easily judge because you don't have context behind it. When we put the context behind it, we get them into the permission place, the potential and possibilities. We also give them permission not to have to be great at everything. So when
yes, great comment. So permission. I love that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just had to point that out. Yeah.
The whole thing we want to do is we want to be putting them in the state of permission, and we're inviting them into the consideration, and we're educating them a little bit at a time. Then as they become more knowledgeable about this and they get it and they walk through it, and we take them into the 360, and then we see how we're going to be bringing those into the ILDP and work through. There may come a point in time where the insight of the bell curve and the differences between that give them context that supports what they're doing in the permission they have for where it is. So it's not, we don't want to give them data that doesn't support where they are in their journey. We want to be prepared to invite them in and apply the data to context if there becomes a place where they are. So that global percentile, there may become a place in time with a leader where it's incredibly valuable for them to see that and to understand it. But in the beginning, it would be a place of judgment, not a place of permission. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I have a second question, which is the final product that the client receives from us is in this format, or do we turn
Yes,
it?
it's in this format. Matter of fact, let me show you. If you go to print this, I've set
Uh-huh.
this up so you can print it to save it as a PDF.
Okay.
And matter of fact, I've had a lot of questions around that. I'm going to send out a sample of how I put this together. All this information in a personalized report. So I'll be doing
Okay.
that this weekend. I'll be sending that out. But yeah, I've got it set up so you can just print this to PDF and it'll save it. So you've got this information. And same thing, there you go. The bell-shaped curves show up as one. Glossary of terms shows up as one. But yeah, it's right there. So I'm gonna send out an example of how I do this, how I put all this together. And working with Sue, we want to make sure that you have a very easy way to present this to your client. Again, you might have a different methodology of presenting it, but it's there to do. Where it's just a scorecard now. It's not the
Thank
Excel spreadsheet. Now it's just a scorecard.
And you don't even have to use this. When we're creating these, one of the things that we recognize is that everyone has their own style and their own structure. If you choose something else, we're creating something that's a foundation or a framework that you could choose to use if you chose to. And what we're supporting you in understanding is that you've got this that you can be working from. If there's another way that it works better for you, please feel, a big part of intelligent leadership, we're not trying to make you fit into us. We recognize that everything that you're doing is complementing through other modalities that you have, through the lens of your areas of expertise, the kind of coaching you do. So if there's something in the structure of what you're doing that is more relevant or more valuable for you, please feel free to do that. Okay. And we've had that come up several times where people have said, I mean, they've literally reached out and said, may we please have permission to make an adjustment? And so we kind of recognize we should make sure that you know ahead of time. Where
Yes,
do we
please. Yeah.
Yeah.
Change this that is going to work for you, the way you can explain things. Does that make sense? Great comment, Sue. Absolutely, you do that. So now let's get into this. I want to get into these strengths and gaps. We don't focus on all of the areas. We're not going to try to improve every one of those areas. We want to go to those areas that really are their strengths and areas where they're really showing gaps. And this is our starting point. We're not going to bite off the whole elephant. One thing I want to point out to you, you're going to see this, and I'm going to stop. I want you to see this. This predominant leadership style is also their least mature style. You're not going to see this every time. It could be that least mature, like I showed before, it could be any one of these. I'm going to tell you why you're going to see this, and I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute. Globally speaking, you look at all the statistics out there from a global statistic, and you can look at this from Deloitte, Harvard Business Review. They all have very similar studies and surveys. 75% of the world's leaders are struggling. They're struggling. They're failing. Not just struggling, they're failing. And there's a reason behind that. They generally have been brought into maybe that individual contributor, dropped into a leadership role, or they're that the only way they know how to manage is what I've been taught, part of that inner core, right? How they were brought up. Some of that might be as resulting from frustration trying to manage people versus leading them, right? And so they, in a lot of ways, they resort back to that single style that they're familiar and comfortable with. And a lot of times that could be the driver or whatever that is, do what I say. It's my way or the highway type thing. Just in Canada and the United States alone, 3 out of 4 employees report working for a toxic boss. That's just United States and Canada. The rest of the world is very similar. Why is that? It's because we only have, in a lot of cases, that one type of leadership style people fall back on. And a lot of cases, it is their derailer. They don't really even know how to function well within that one leadership style. And so that's why you might see this quite a bit, especially maybe with emerging leaders. or even with yourself. It could be that one thing that I'm familiar with, telling people what to do, or being that problem solver. But then again, being that problem solver, they get stuck with analysis through, paralysis through analysis, that kind of thing. All those things are going to come into how you start to meet your client, start to debrief this, start to have those conversations around this. So in this case, and I'm going back to this is the case in this one. If I were to look at this as this BN, I could see, yeah, they're a very high driver. Those drivers are those, they can be those individuals where, yeah, they can be viewed as very heroic, very strong leaders. But if that's their place that they're really derailing, that could be one of those areas that you might see, that's one of those areas that they're just the most familiar with, where they actually have other strengths in other areas. That's why we look at the most mature and the least mature and their predominant leadership style. Now, what you're going to see on this, you're going to see this an awful lot. People are going to be drawn immediately to that least mature style. Why am I that person? And in some cases, like that incident that we had earlier this week, this individual is very high on activity and a negative number on maturity. They were very upset. And even to the point where saying, I don't have any faith in this because this is not who I am. You're going to see that a lot. This doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean you're a good person. Just means that's our starting point on your leadership strengths and gaps. So what I do at that point, when people start to talk about, these strengths and gaps, that's where I pull up the interpretive guide ebook. After I explain this to them, this scorecard to them, then I'm going to go over to the MLEI, and I always start, and this is me, okay? This is how I do things. But you might find a different way to do this. I'm going to go down, in this case, to the driver, which is number 8. And which is not only there, and I always start at least mature first. And the reason I do that, let me stop here for just a minute. Why I always start with the least mature first, and this is me, is I want to break down those walls. When I'm debriefing this, I want to get them off the edge. I want to show them this doesn't mean you're a bad person, because you're going to find this. There's going to be a lot of really stuck on this. And I guarantee every one of you in this have thought that already when they saw their report, right? I'm not that person. I'm not immature there. And maybe that, hair on the back of your neck stood up a little bit, and you're going to see that. You're going to see people combative. You're going to see people not believing this, very confrontational. I've had people that just get quite angry at this. This is not who I am. This is not what my Myers-Briggs told me. This is not what my DISC told me. Well, I understand that. Those are outer core predictive assessments. We're looking at your inner core. So I start with a little, and I've done this. I did this with Carolina the other day, and I think, who else have I done this with? Raise your hands this week. Yeah. Yep. A couple of you I know I've done this with. So I'm going to show you what I do. And I'm going to need a volunteer who, for all practical purposes, who can I see? I can only see a few on my screen. So let's use Fabiola, so I can see her. Right? Oh, Christine, you want to volunteer?
She put her hand up first. There you go.
Christine, you're for all practical purposes, your name is Sample, okay? Or be
Okay.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to have you do. Let me change my screen so you can see. Can you see the interpretive guide ebook? That's what I have up right now.
Yep.
Okay. This is what I have them do in your book under driver, and every single one of these is going to have recognizing these mature driver traits in, middle of the road, recognizing the derailer driver. So I'm going to ask you to kind of play along with me, Christine, on this. What I have them do is I have them start reading back to me as I am statements. I have them change these to I am statements and read them back to me. And the reason I do this is I want to show, I start at the top. Yeah, you've got some great positive, mature traits about you. But it could be just a couple of these down lower that are throwing you off. Not all of them. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. So, Christine, I'm going to have you for us, if you will. As I mean, you're not Christine right now. You're BN sample. Just for all practical purposes here, I'm going to have you read these back to me as I am statements.
Okay. I am assertive, self-confident, and decisive. I am a resourceful self-starter with contagious energy and enthusiasm. I win respect and admiration of others. I provide, sponsor, and promote worthwhile causes. I inspire others to act. I align my interests with others. I tend to be viewed as heroic by others.
Okay, let's stop right there for just a minute. How do those ring with you? And
Oh,
so,
me personally?
yes, I mean, if you're BN, let's do this role play here. How do those feel?
Okay.
Do these,
Sorry,
do
should I
these,
go?
do these kind of speak to you as someone who you are?
If I am BN, sorry, I don't remember my scores as BN.
This
So
will
this
be
might,
not only a predominant, but also your predominant style, but your least mature. So we're starting at least mature first. We're pointing these things out.
yeah. Sorry, Rich. And all the role play is catching me a little bit off guard here
Okay,
because
well, not role play. Just, I mean, if you were to read through these are pretty good mature traits, right?
yes, I think that's a safe common ground to
Yeah.
agree on. Yeah, reading
So,
these feels
and,
good to say.
okay, and this is why I start with that mature driver, showing these positive attributes. So then I move on to recognizing the middle of the road and derailing characteristics of a driver. So I want you to read these same things to me as I am,
Okay.
starting at the
Okay.
recognize.
I am forceful, aggressive, confrontational, and belligerent. I am adventurous and willing to take risks in order to dominate my environment. I care only about my own interests and use my power to promote my own self-interest. I seek to dominate my environment regardless of the cost to others. I enjoy keeping others off balance and insecure. I often use threats and fear to gain compliance from others. I can be egomaniacal.
Okay. So as I do this, now I'm gonna tell you we picked the driver to do this on this. The driver is an interesting person. They can either be this viewed as this very heroic, confident, decisive, resourceful leader, very good leader, or the driver can be one of the most toxic of all. When they derail, they can be some of those areas that are very toxic individuals, and you can kind of see this in some ways. But so as I'm reading through this, as I'm having them read through this, some of these might stand out, and you're going to see they'll stop and they'll say, "Yeah, that could be me." Not all of these, or they'll say, "No, that's not me. That's not me." Or, yeah, sometimes I care about my own interests versus what the other interests of the team are. What's in it for me? And same thing going down through here. Now, not all of these are going to be so black and white, or as the driver is. But the point that I'm making here is I always start with the least mature to show them, yes, I've got these great attributes about me. But it might only be one or two of these areas down here that are causing me to derail in that area. Some of those things might show up under stress, might show up, whatever that situation may be. By doing this, and I'm going to stop right here for a minute, by starting at the most mature, the positive attributes of the least mature person, then you start getting them off the edge. You start getting them focused on, oh, okay, maybe I'm not such a bad person. Maybe I'm not a bad leader. Maybe there's only a couple areas that I need to really look at that might be creating that issue for me. Once I start there, and there's a reason I start with the least mature, because then I can move on to the most mature and the predominant leadership styles. If you think through here, that predominant leadership, is also the same as the least mature. You can look at maybe, why is this person derailing? Why are they, you know, not derailing? And you're not always going to see this. Some others might be the least mature, not this one, as I pointed out. But do you understand kind of where I'm going with this? I want to break down those walls immediately when I start to debrief this, because then I can go to the most mature. And the other one, which are really their strengths, their hidden strengths, versus just their gaps, versus I'm a bad person, right? You know, you take this, and Carolina, we did this exercise this week. So we did this exercise this week. We walked through this and there were some questions. Oh my gosh, you know, does this mean, and some of the questions I remember, Carolina, you had, does that mean I'm bad? Am I a bad person? No, I'm not that bad person. So walking through that least mature first, when I'm debriefing this, getting them to understand these are just simply strengths and gaps, not bad versus good. Make sense?
There's a layer that I add to that.
Yes, please.
If
Yep.
I could, and then I think we could go ahead and take a break. When I talk with people about this, I talk about these are meant to inform us, not define us.
Yes, exactly. There we go.
We're
I
not
see a lot of head nodding there, Sue, on that one.
we're not going to be all of any of those. So they inform me, like, do you see yourself in this? Do you see yourself in this? Because what we're really focused on is not the absolute of the statement, but it's why this becomes a statement that you relate or don't relate to. So if they say, oh, yes, I see myself as that, well, great. Or if they don't see themselves as that, we recognize that there are reasons that it's reasonable they wouldn't. Maybe they're new in a position of leadership. This hasn't been something that they've done before. It could be that they had been told by someone earlier in their career, well, you can't do that. You're no good at that. And you don't even think about that too. So they were instructed not to, so they haven't matured in that. Or they just don't have any training in it. They haven't really done much with it. They use it, but they don't really know. So when we take the data points and help them understand it's reasonable these can be that, it's and then we're using them to inform us. It opens them up to let's explore what's underneath it so we get the maximum out of it. And by the way, it gives them also permission not to be great at something. Well, who's going to be great at everything? When you see what all of these different things are, you realize in the scheme of everything. So when you get into a position of leadership where leaders historically have felt like they should be great at everything, now they can have permission to know I'm not great at everything, and that's okay. I will surround myself with other people. And now I understand the reason why. So it's not a judgment. It's how do we get the very best out of everything? Does this help from the very beginning of it? That as you keep going through, you're going to be able to come back and get even more educated with that and deeper, robust answers. Is that helpful?
All right. Excellent. Well, let's take should we take a 5-minute break, Sue? And then come back and we'll jump into this a little bit more before we move on. And we'll do that. 5 minutes?
So we're at 10:03, so we'll come back around at 10:03 Eastern time. Sorry, we'll come back at about 10:08 Eastern time.
See you in a minute.
Let's
Okay.
rock this.
Let's go on to the next one. So the next one, if you guys are seeing this, which is the next one that is the most mature? Because we've kind of covered some of the bases here on that individual, the least mature. So the next one, the most mature one, is going to be that entertainer. And so I then jump to doing the same thing with the entertainer, which is trait number 3. I come up and I find trait number 3 in the book. And if you look on the guide book, it'll tell you where it starts, the page starts. And now here's where I go here. So I go with the most mature. And if you look at the predominant leadership trait, least mature, and most mature, being those 3 areas we focus on, in a lot of ways, that predominant leadership trait is that indisputable strength that we have, right? Because we've developed that over those years. It could be that potential strength, even though it could be a derailer. We view that on the inner core as our strength. And in a lot of ways, we want to continue to build on that. But that most mature, even though the activity, let me come back and I'm going to jump back to that spreadsheet. Even though the activity, this could be high, it could be low. That doesn't matter. In this ways, it's a very high activity, and it is that most mature trait, where is that 0.467, which is a very high average. So they have a lot of confidence, a lot of ability around that entertainer, the self-esteem and self-development. And if you notice, I'm not talking about yet the outer core competencies that these reflect on, just what the inner core is. So this activity could be low. It could be, and again, sometimes it even could be that predominant leadership trait. It turns out to be the most mature. But in this instance, where it's a high average, that most mature, what in a lot of ways, this is their surprise strength, their hidden strength. Even though their predominant leadership style says this, that most mature could be one of those areas that is really that super strength that they've hidden, or they're not fully aware of, or haven't developed that, even though they have a lot of confidence or maturity in that area. So let's go back to the same exercise. After I talk about that least mature trait with this, then I come over to find their most mature. And then we do the same things. We read through some of these. And so who wants to be my reader now for me? Raise your hand. I can't see everybody. Claudia, okay, you're up.
Okay.
So at this point, I have them start reading through the same, recognizing that mature entertainer trait in you. So if you can start here and read through these as those I am statements.
Sure. I am self-assured, confident, and charming. I am direct, fast-paced, and enthusiastic. I listen and speak well. I persuade and motivate people. I can be influential and popular. I can adapt well to changing conditions and remain optimistic. I desire self-improvement. I know my strengths and weaknesses. I can be dramatic in my actions and opinions.
So I stopped there, and yeah, those are those strengths, those mature traits of the entertainer. And we talk about that for a little bit. I talk about that with a client. What are these areas that really resonate with you? But I don't stop there, because again, even though that might be the most mature strength they have, I want to go and reinforce that in this thing. So reading through some of these others helps them reinforce, oh, I really do have some of these strengths. So I'm going to have you do the same thing, Claudia.
Okay.
Read through this as well. This
The
next
second one or the derailer?
We're going to do them both. So just
Okay.
read here.
I'm pragmatic, efficient, and goal-oriented. I'm hyper competitive and believe winning is the most important thing. I can be manipulative and calculating. I value style over substance. I constantly worry about how others see me and the image I project. I constantly compare myself to others. I have an inflated sense of self, which often leads to grandiose expectations and arrogance. I exaggerate accomplishments to draw attention to myself.
One of the things that I do at this point is I'm watching them. I'm watching Claudia read through these. I'm watching the client read through these. I want to see their reactions to some of these, because and a lot of times they'll stop and say, no, that's not me. I did this with somebody last night. I was doing these until almost 9 o'clock last night, my time. So with different people, which is great. I'm getting to meet a lot of people, and I love doing this. But as they were reading through this, they were like, they would stop and say, "Oh, no, that's not me. Oh, no, that's not me." Okay, I get it. That might be something a little bit. Um, and so some of those things, yeah, you've got these great strengths, right? These great mature strengths. But I want you I want to start reinforcing that as I read through some of these others below, and then they start saying, "That ain't me. That's not me." Or, yeah, maybe I could be a little bit that way. And so again, let me have you just finish this, Claudia, reading through
Okay.
this bottom one.
I'm immoral, untrustworthy, devious, and jealous. I'm opportunistic and exploit others. I do not tolerate others winning. I undermine those who have moved ahead. I often stab colleagues in the back for personal gain. I manipulate others to achieve my ends.
How did that feel reading through that, Claudia?
I was thinking of an image came to mind. It's like they're very narcissistic people that would do
There you
certain things,
go.
right?
The entertainer, when they really derail, they go off the rails, and maybe even negative numbers. In
Right.
a lot of ways, the entertainer could be that narcissistic leader
Mm,
when they really start to derail looking at some of these things. And so that's important for you as a coach to
mm,
start seeing these traits, right? How am I going to help them understand that going down the road? Am I going to call them a narcissist right off the bat? No.
no,
Would I ever do that? No.
no.
No, probably not. You
I'm
know,
not I'm not a psychologist, so I wouldn't know, but of course I can see the traits in it. And
but that's a good point
that's
you
it.
just made.
Right.
As PCCs and MCCs, right? We are looking at helping them change their mindset, helping them that transformative behaviors. We're not pointing out, oh, this is, you must really suck as a leader. You're not going to say that ever, but you're going to help them see that themselves, help them start to understand. And how do we change those things, right, Maddie? I see you nodding your head quite a bit there. That's part of our job, is not to point out, but to help them start seeing these things. Help
One of
them.
the other, one of the other, well, I'm sorry, Rich. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're good.
There's something that I have begun to do, which, especially when they're earlier in their journey, is that toward the point about, in the beginning when we're starting with the most mature of it, and say, do you see yourself in any of these? So I've modeled for them that the question underneath it is, as they read it, do you see yourself in any of these? When I get to the one where it's the most derailing, I simply have them read them.
Yeah.
And I don't say, do you see yourself in any of these? I just let it sit. And then because I don't want them to either defend themselves or be in a position of judgment, I move it back so that we are then taking what we've seen from the other sides of it so that we can strengthen what it is. And then they can say, wow, maybe other people do see me like that, or they can think about it, but we're not putting them in the position where they have to respond, because then they often are still in a place, because we're earlier in our coaching relationship, where they may choose to be, instead of receptive, they may choose to be defensive. When we give them an example and we model for them, then there are things they can be doing, and then they can reflect on it and bring it back to us at some point. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can I comment something? I know there are two hands up, but just briefly. On many occasions, we are so blind at our behavior, that
Yeah.
the behavior and our behavior representing that sentence, that is much easier to see it on others. So something that I generally do is I ask my clients, you came here judging this person so and so with this sentence. What is the behavior? And then they say, do you do? And I ask them, do you see yourself doing something similar? And then suddenly it's like a wow moment. It's like, oh, I know what you mean now. Yeah.
Thank you. Great comment. Maddie, you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Roberto. Nope, we can't hear you, Maddie. Maddie, we can't hear you.
Maddie,
Yeah,
Maddie,
we can't.
we don't hear you.
We can't hear you. Yeah. Let's go. Let's go to Roberto, and we'll come back to you, Maddie. See if you can fix this. Roberto.
Okay. Could you hear me? Yes.
Yeah. we hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I just wondering, I am a little bit curious about which are your comments in a case in which any leader, what of course will happen, said, "Hey, I'm not that person. No, this is not me. Could you please to give me or give us any I can imagine, but I would like to hear your talk at this
Yeah.
time."
Absolutely. And great question, because that's going to happen. Even after you debrief this whole thing, there's still going to be, that's not me. Roberto's up in the night. That's not me. This whole thing is crazy. That's why we use multiple assessments. We don't just hang on the MLEI. We're
Okay.
going to do an outer core assessment that really correlates with the MLEI to reinforce some of those things. And then the 360 that we have is going to have very similar questions on the 360. What's the perception of those people we work with, right? Once we get all three of them together, which might take a little bit of time, right? Take a few weeks. That's when we start to look at what, can we open this up now? Can we see, is that reinforcing maybe what your inner core is telling you, where you're coming from, and how is that actually, that inner core, how is that translating to the outer core? How healthy and vibrant is that outer core based on our inner core? And what are other people seeing in us? What's their perception? So often, and I want to show you something.
That's perfect.
And then we'll come back to Maddie.
Yes, and we can return to our first assessment and say, "Hey,
there you go.
Are you looking these results, and what about our first assessment?" Okay.
And the interesting thing around this, I want to show you something here. See all these different, they can be influential and popular, or, they're very dramatic in their actions and opinions, or they value style over substance. In the individual comments they see on the 360, a lot of times you see very similar open-ended comments. And so, as we read through that 360, and we're going to get to this in the future, but yeah, all of a sudden, wow, the perception of people, maybe that is who I am.
Claro. Yeah.
Right. And so we're guiding them down the path to get to that point themselves, right? That transformative, we're trying to change their behaviors as we change their mindset. So Maddie, are you able to talk yet?
And Rich, what you just said was
so.
so powerful. We're helping them be in the position where they choose to step into it without us telling them this is who they are.
Right.
But they get insights, and then as they do, then they seek it, as opposed to be feeling like they're being told from a place of judgment. Permission, curiosity, education, excitement, and energy versus you are. And
Yeah.
these are, and the negative, and they're pushing away, and they're resistant, and there's judgment. It's a whole different mindset.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Does that answer
Thank
your
you.
question, Roberto? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Maddie.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Very good.
So assuming that 0.8 is the maximum on maturity scale, and we might meet people with high maturity around 4.4 something, 4.6, whatever.
Yeah.
Would be a good practice to, as we go through all of them, to show them that actually, no matter how mature you are, you might have one or two from the middle and one from derailers, and
Yes.
that's an opportunity to strengthen the strength.
There you go. That's that great point. That's exactly what we do. And yeah, we want to continue strengthening their strengths, right? We want to keep building on that foundation, that platform they already have for themselves, while being aware of when we start to derail, of those derailing characteristics. And so it could be some, and they all blend together, right? All these things impact each other, all these different traits. So maybe a derailing characteristic in another one might be impacting maybe the way we make decisions, or those sort of things. Great, that's exactly right. And
And the
so
same for low maturity, but because no matter how many derailers we have, there is at least one or two from the strengths list that might be a good starting point to develop.
yes, and that's where exactly why I start with the least mature, is I want them to see, no, not everything about you is bad. And you want to get them away from this being bad thing. No, you're not a bad leader. You just simply have some areas that we have found that we're starting to identify that we can improve. We all have areas to improve on, right? So that's why I want to show them that. And that's why I always have them start at those positive attributes. See, we're not so bad. We have a lot of great attributes around us. So
Rich,
we don't want to hear, none of us want to hear, yeah, you're a horrible leader. Maddie, you get on a call with me and you're my coach and you look at my report and say, Rich, you're hopeless. We're just, let's just end this. Let's just end this now because I can't help you. That's not what we do, right? We want to build that. We want to build them up. We want to help them understand how do they create their own personal masterpiece, right? And this is simply the starting point. So let me jump into what
Rich, I want to make one other quick comment right here as you start into the next spot of it. This is another reason why we begin with the MLEI before the 360. It's also, and you're going to hear when we talk about the core purpose statement first, or this afternoon, this is another reason why we begin with the core purpose statement. When we're teaching them to look from a positive lens at the current health and vibrancy of how they are on the inside, and they see that no matter where it is they are, they have the potential to grow. When they're informed by the way they show up currently, they have the ability to see it more as an opportunity for growth than as a place of judgment. They say, oh, this validates that this is the way I'm showing up. And I see already that I have ways that I can be working with that. Okay. So we're inviting them into a healthy relationship with the fact that I'm really, I'm pretty rock star in some of these areas, could continue to prove. And yet I understand now more clearly why there may be some areas where I am not as mature. And I can then, when I see how that shows up, when we get ready to create that individual leadership development plan, those are inflection points for what goes into the plan. Okay, and we'll talk more about that over time.
All right. Thank you, Sue. Absolutely. So what I do next, what I'm going to show you after I've debriefed everything, after we've walked through this, we've kind of got to the point, I give them an assignment. And that is, for example, if to go through and read each of those areas, whether that's the least mature, the most mature, that predominant leadership style, and I have them go back and read in the ebook all about that individual. Now we're going to talk to them later about this. We want them to start learning a little bit about who they are themselves. And if you notice in this ebook, at the end of it, if you start reading through the entertainer, it'll start right at the front, tells a little bit about who the entertainer is, understanding that leadership trait in you. Again, this is the area that I look at. Working with them, and then I give them that assignment to really start going through this, looking at reading through this, and at the end, and tips for strengthening that trait in you. tips for working with people who are predominant entertainers. And the one thing about this is as you work through this with your client and helping them be better leaders, it's also helping them to maybe recognize those same traits in others so they can maybe be more effective team leaders, more effective leaders themselves. And at the end, here we go. At the end, there are several questions, kind of an awareness exercise is what this is. Having them go through this and answer these things. So the next time I meet with them, I come back to this and have them, let's talk through this a little bit. What did you learn about these areas? And so just a great way for them to start reading about that, answering some more questions about themselves, getting a little bit deeper dive. And again, we don't want to solve the problems for them, right? We want to point them in a direction where they can start finding these things and help transforming those issues. So that's why this interpretive guide ebook is such a great tool. Use it, and my suggestion also to each of you is for you to read through this. The Intelligent Leader, I think, not Intelligent Leadership, but another book John wrote called The Intelligent Leader. If you read that, it also goes into each one of these traits in depth. Read through those, get familiar with those, what they are about, so you can talk, around that. So that's why I've sent the interpretive guide ebook to you as well. Make notes. I printed out. I've got mine printed out. I've got it. I've got notes all through it. I've got it highlighted. I've got it dog-eared. All sorts of stuff. Same with the books that that I've got that John has written. A lot of great information in there on the whole IL process. So before we move forward today, let's stop right here for just a minute. What questions or comments do you have about this?
I have something that I might have missed. I'm sorry if I'm asking you to go back, but on
Yeah, what is it?
on the spreadsheet, when
Mhm.
we are on the first data entry, I'm not sure how you fill out the column G, which is strengths and gaps.
Okay, great question. Let's go back to that real quick. And okay, so I'm going to go back to the data entry here and how I fill these out. So the first
Correct.
one,
Yeah.
let me just delete these so we can fill these out together. Okay.
Thank you.
So the first one is that predominant leadership trait, which is based on the highest activity. Okay. So if you look at the activity here, let me ask you this, Claudia, what stands out to you as being the highest activity? Nope, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, the driver one.
Driver. Okay. So there we go. So that would be that PDL, that predominant leadership trait, which is based on highest activity. So we're going to put that in there. Right?
Right.
So let's go to the most mature one next. Now we jump over to that maturity column. Which of these can you point out to me would be the most mature trait?
That I don't know. I get lost.
Okay. So the higher the number, the more mature it is.
Okay. So there would be helper? No. Well, I guess so. Or no, entertainer.
Entertainer. Yeah. Put
Yeah.
0.467. So the
Yeah.
higher the number, the more mature that is. The lower the number, the more derailing characteristics or less mature or significant derailing traits are. So in this case,
Rich,
gonna-
may I just ask a really quick question just before you do that? On the
Yeah.
right-hand side in the column where we have the notes, there are 3 different groups of notes. As you're looking at those, Claudia, did those help you with understanding what to put in each place?
No.
Okay, so
Okay.
one of the things we
Specifically
wanna
the
make-
ones at the bottom where it says PDL is based on the highest activity, because the next one says MA is based on most mature. And actually MA means most mature. It's not based on most mature.
Well, that's
Correct.
just the acronym. Yeah. It's not so much based.
Exactly,
Maybe I
the
can
P-
reword that. Yeah.
Yeah, but the first line says PDL is based on the highest activity. So
Okay.
that is correct, I think.
Okay, that's so yeah, so I need to correct that. Thank you for pointing that out. So PDL is not based on highest activity, it is the highest activity.
Oh, okay, got it.
PDL is the highest activity, MM is the most mature, and LM is least mature. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
So
That's
So
our goal.
that would be-
Keep improving them. There you go.
Yep, thank you. And then least mature, and I'm going to change it. Least mature in this case is going to be,
Perfectionist.
and this is, that's actually, yeah, perfectionist. So, and I had changed this, Bien's actual sample on the arbitrator is 0.367. So this is 0.367. That's the actual number. I had changed that for an example earlier. So the least mature in this case is that driver, right?
Two are the same.
Yes, but these two at the bottom are the same, but that 0.167 is not. That is the lowest.
Okay, I'm sorry. You're right. Yes.
Yep. And so here's something very interesting that I want to point out. There can be ties. Doesn't mean just one, it could be one or the other. So if I put that down as least mature, but say also this thinker was a 0.167 as well.
Mhm.
Then what do you do? Well, that's also one of the least mature traits. It's also an area where they're starting to derail. So when I go to the interpretive guide ebook, I start with both of those. If there's more than one, you start with both of them. You want to make sure, because they can be, that least mature. These are areas you're having gaps or strengths in, right? Could be more
Right.
than just 2 or 3, depending on how they are. You could have a couple of them, like, for example, I'm going to give you another example here. So if I type that in as least mature, what if I come along and the arbitrator is also a 47?
It'll be PDL-LM,
Yeah, it also would be a PDL, right?
right?
So these are areas that they have strengths in, but and later on, if you really start getting into the Enneagram, you could understand why I did driver and arbitrator, because
Right.
they really complement each other in a lot of ways. But as do all of these. So yeah, you can have another PDL there.
Got
That
it.
doesn't mean that means you can go back and start looking at these. These areas are your real strengths. Maybe it's more than one. Maybe you have a real strengths in more than one area. It could be 2 areas.
And if you went back to entertainer, and that MM, how would that relate to the other part? To the zero, to the maturity level?
Maturity level, so the 0.467 is, if you look at the scale of what maturity is, it can go from -8 all the way to +8. That's how the scale is set up. The further away it is from 0, the higher the number, that's the more mature they become, the more mature they are. So that would be 0.467. You're never going to see you're not ever going to see like a 1.467, because it goes up to 0.8 is the highest on the maturity scale on the way it's done.
So
You'll never see that, by the way. You're never going to see that.
Right, but the filling out the G column, you're using the bell to fill it out?
No.
Okay.
No.
So where
This
are
is
these numbers? I just got lost with where are the references so I can populate it. Where do you take them from?
Okay, from the report that you got. That's a good question. I'm going to go back to that actual report.
Right.
And hold on just a minute. Let me change this. So this is where I get these numbers from, is right. Can you
Yeah.
see this report?
No. Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah.
from the interpretation scale at the bottom, that's what you're using.
Yes. From
Oh,
not
okay.
exhibiting high level leadership. It's not so
So-
much the interpretation scale. This is just kind of it tells them how they work. I get those numbers from here.
No, I got that. It's just that I
Okay.
don't know how to fill out the G column based on these numbers because I transfer all my numbers, my personal report, I transfer it to my numbers and I don't know how to fill out the G column.
Okay, yeah, and going back to that again. Let me see here. Okay, so that G column again, I'm gonna just let me do this. Go back to oops. So there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna delete these out of there. So again, if we go back and we look at the G column, this strengths and gaps. And if I change this, I should change this is the highest activity. If I change that there. So the PDL is the highest activity only. Okay. So the predominant leadership trait, we're just focused on this column right here. So I would fill out the G column based on the highest number over here.
Correct.
So PDL. So then we skip over to the mature column altogether. So the most mature trait on here. What is the most mature trait again?
That one.
That one. So, and it's based on that, yeah. The higher the number, that's the higher the maturity ratio is. And it's not based on, I wouldn't look at the interpretive scale because that populates on the next on the scorecard. This is simply based on what's the most mature here. So I would put that MM right there, most mature, because that's what it is. If you look at all of these, you compare all these together, you look up and down the scale, what becomes the most mature? What's the highest number there?
Right. And sorry, if we disregard the activity and we just stay in the maturity level, number 4, artist, and number 6, disciple, are the same. So what would they be considered? Just
Number 4,
looking at the
artist. Number 6,
maturity.
disciple. As far as
Maturity.
maturity,
Yeah.
they're neither the most mature or the least mature.
So what would they be? Well, what do we fill out in the G column?
Nothing on them.
On the G column, nothing?
Nothing based on those ones that add up. No. We
Okay.
don't do it for every single one of them. We're just looking,
okay.
no, we don't do it for all.
I was thinking that I had to fill out everything.
No. We are just looking, like I said, we're just looking at a few of those traits that either the most predominant, the most mature, or the least mature. That's our starting point when we start talking about strengths and gaps.
So the client is not expecting the whole yellow thing fill out.
No.
No.
No,
Okay.
you don't, and you don't show them this yellow thing. It's just this
Sure.
square.
He'll get the other
Yep,
one.
yep.
Yeah,
And
got
so
it.
that going back to this. Okay, so oops.
Thank you.
Okay. We got a couple, and so that's how that populates over here. So you can see on the strengths and gaps,
Yeah.
we're just focused on those ones here. And that's where we go back to the interpretive guide ebook. We're just focused on a couple of them. What are your
Okay.
real strengths based on your inner core? What are the areas that you know, if we try to explain them all to them,
Right.
then we're gonna really confuse them.
Okay.
And that's not what we're doing. So got a couple questions here. Let me stop sharing for a minute. Joanna,
Thank you very much, Rich.
you're very welcome. I'm glad that we are able to
Yeah.
maybe, and I hope that wasn't confusing for other people as well, but I hope we were able to clear that up. So Joanna.
So a couple of things I get, we start with the least mature, then we go to the most mature. I might have missed something. When do we actually look at the predominant trait?
Right after the most mature. And in the case of this one, it was the least mature was also the predominant trait. And that's why I explained earlier, you're gonna run across that. And that could be that one that people are just the most familiar with, but it's also their derailer.
Right. So when
So,
it's
and-
the same, we come to that later. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I go through all of them. Starting with the least mature and that interpretive guide ebook. Well, we read through all that. So
Yeah.
I do the most mature, and I also do the predominant leadership style trait.
At the end.
Yeah, reading that interpretive guide ebook, how we did that. Yeah, I go through all of them with the client.
And then you said something that caught my attention. You said there's a relationship, interesting relationship between arbiter and driver.
Yeah.
So there's kind of these things influence each other. And and there I feel like, how do we get that level of, I know we're all beginners here, but I'm conscious that there's a level of interpretation that is deeper that we're not
Yes.
looking at yet.
And that, yes, that goes deep into the Enneagram. That gets into the things that we call wings, and how where your power base is based on the Enneagram. But we don't go there. We don't go there. We really keep it fairly simple based on these simple areas: predominant leadership. I said, yeah, if you start to study the Enneagram, getting deep in the Enneagram, and that's not what we do. If you wanted to do that yourself, then you could start to understand how does this work. And this is just the MLEI, okay? But when you start to do those outer core assessments, you start to see that critical thinking, which is that arbitrator. And let me come back here, and we'll jump to the next question here in just a moment. Let me come back. Let me show you one thing. I want to make this as simple as I can here. What did I just do? There we go.
So we didn't listen to you. We weren't able to listen to you.
Okay, just a second. Oh,
When
what's that?
When Rich gets done, there's a comment I'll share to compliment what you've got.
Okay, for some reason this isn't being happy for me. Let me put that back over there. All right. Okay. So if you see can you see my PowerPoint now? I'll make that bigger so you can see it. If we go back to, and I don't want to get too far on the weeds on this, because right now, if you look at the outer core, and I'm just going to explain this to you real quick, how these work. All right. The arbitrator. Let me explain this. And I don't want to go any further into this right now because I don't want to confuse you. But the arbitrator is that person who has ability to look at the big picture, right? All of those areas. And as that translates that outer core, that becomes that critical thinker. We've looked at all the data, right? We can compile that data. We can get all those things together, and then we can make decisions, arbitrator, perfectionist. We make those decisions in the outer core that are that moral decision maker, becomes that moral decision maker. How do we make the best decisions based on all of that critical thinking that we have put together? Does it make sense? A little bit. And so that's getting more as we start getting into the outer core and some of these other things. Some of these things are going to become more clear, but that's really getting into really the deep discussion around the Enneagram. We don't go there with our clients. It's good to understand that. And like I said, me and another gentleman that's also a coach, we teach a 12-week course on the Enneagram. 2 hours a week for 12 weeks. That really we dive into what the Enneagram really means, but that's not what we're doing here. They do relate, all of these. If you look at all of these, Joanna, all of these influence everything that we do. Everything we do in the inner core impacts everything we do on the outer core. So it's not just, are we an arbitrator? Are we just that person? Are they an arbitrator? No, those things that happen as an arbitrator impact other areas of what we do. And so I don't want to get into so much what the spider web means right now. We're just going to focus on those traits. And so I want you to notice one thing, Joanna, and I really appreciate you asking that question, because I did bring that up. But immediately you went from the scorecard to what does that mean? And so, we could get really lost in translation, lost in the weeds. Having the ability to explain that is, important. but we don't really want to get so far in the weeds in that. And I'm more than happy when we get together, if you've got time with me, I'm more than happy to explain the Enneagram a little bit deeper to you. But if I really started jumping into that, we'd lose what we were doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the clarity of what we're doing now. But when I read through the e-guide, or I haven't read it all, but the bits that were relevant to me, I was very curious when it talks about the route, you know, the 9 to the way to
Okay.
work this, and I thinking, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have a clue how to
Okay.
explain to someone why it's a 963 or
Okay. You bring up a very good point. I'm going to explain that to you. Now that you brought that up, I do need to explain that. Let me ask Fabiola a question. Do you have a question? Oh, you're on mute.
Just briefly, I'm going again to the template and I populate the first page, but in the second page, I'm not able to see the maturity levels reflected. So that might be something that is happening, just to let you know. And the other thing that I have as a question is that, is there a reason why the style number is starting with a 2 and not with a 1 or with a 9?
Okay. Yes. Oh, I see what you're saying. Why the report doesn't show that? Okay, the report comes out. The way the report comes out is it starts at the helper, right?
Yep.
It starts at the helper, but it doesn't really show the numbers on the side. That's how they correspond to the Enneagram.
Okay.
So what we have done is I have that on the data entry, so you can just look at your numbers and enter those down as you see them. But the way it populates on the scorecard, it goes 1 through 9. All right, and that's simply how John had set that up in the report to populate that way. So now when the scorecard is 1 through 9, 1 through 9, where you can now correlate those to the interpretive guide ebook, 1 through 9, perfectionist, all the way down to driver.
Yeah, my question was not about the chart. It's more about instead of starting with the 1 and going through that to 9, is there a reason beyond that to start with the helper or not?
No, there's no reason why that is. That's just the way that the survey was set up.
Okay.
There's no reason to start there. No reason to start.
Okay, thank you. That was all.
Yeah. All right, Maddie.
Yeah, I think Fabiola mentioned that the scorecard is not automatically filling in with the maturity. Try to change comma with dot or dot with comma, because it
Yeah.
happened to me.
That was something that was brought up. Thank you, Maddie. That was brought up to my attention earlier this week, that different parts of the world don't use the dot; they use the comma. So, and different, set up in Excel that way. So yeah, use a comma instead of the dot. Yes, Roberto.
Thank you. Now, just a quick question. Which is the scale for activity and which is the scale for maturity? Maturity is from 0 to 0.8. Is that right?
Maturity is negative
Ah,
0.8 to positive 0.8.
okay. And activity?
Is 0 to 60.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. You're not, I'll tell you what, you're never going to see, you might see activity scores up around 60. That's very possible. Steve Jobs was a 60 as an arbitrator. He was a negative number as the maturity. He was both ends of the scale. He was very good at looking at the big picture, but he was a tyrant when he came to implementing things. So,
Okay. Thank you, Rich.
matter of fact, he scored the highest on the arbitrator. Nobody else has scored that high but him. Very interesting. That's one thing that John points out. I've seen 50s. I've never seen a 60. I've never seen more than like a 6.6 something on maturity levels. And but you will see some negative numbers. You won't see really big negative numbers, just from my experience. But yeah, that is a skill. So Okay, now let's take a quick break right now. Let's take a quick 5 minutes and then we'll come back and I want to explain a little more around the Enneagram so you understand a little bit why it says in certain ones why 369 or different characteristics. Okay. So we'll come back to that. That's a great point. Yes,
I
Claudia.
have a question. Yeah, sorry. It's 1 p.m. here in Latin America, so I was wondering when you meant to have the longer break.
You want to do, we can do, how about we do a 10-minute break now?
Oh,
10,
she
15 minutes?
might
It's
be
up to you, I'm
referring,
just asking.
yeah. Well, let's ask everyone because there are three factors in there. Rich, your capacity when you've got to stop.
I have to stop. I've got another hour before I have to, unfortunately, as Sue mentioned, I have
Okay.
a funeral today I have to attend, but
When we get through with that time and he has to leave, that's about the time we would also be stopped. We would be complete with the MLEI.
yes.
So it's reasonable that we might take a little bit longer break. Now, a 10-minute break now, if that's what you guys would like, we can certainly do that. If you want to get a snack or something like that. And then when the MLEI gets completed, before we step into the core purpose statement, we were going to take a longer gap. So do you guys want to chat about that for a few minutes, or do you want to do 10 minutes now and then the longer break when we finish the MLEI? What are your thoughts?
Yes, personally, that would suit me. Just
right.
wanted to know.
10
Yeah.
minutes?
For me,
Okay. Yeah, let's just do a quick 10-minute right now, and then we'll come back. So we'll come back at, let's say 5 after the hour. That's 9 minutes. That work? Okay, see you in just a moment.
Here we go.
Okay. So let's go back to the power. Well, let me show you first on the interpretive guide ebook. So let's get into a little bit about the pathways that we create positive reinforcement. We start to improve these different areas. I'm going to explain these from a couple different ways. I'm going to explain it from the inner core and a little bit from the outer core to help you understand how this actually works. First off, in all the books, it's going to show, if you can see this, it'll talk about if you're a mature predominant arbitrator. I'm just going to start there. In order to move towards more increasing levels of leadership maturity, it talks about it's important to start looking at the different attributes of each of these areas that are lined within the Enneagram. The Enneagram goes one direction. Now I want to show you on this. I'm going to share. Come back to a different screen. Can everybody see this Will of Intelligent Leadership now? Okay. So the reason why we talk about and why is the arbitrator and the entertainer and the team leader so different? Why are they only like 963 versus some of the others where they'll go 1, then 4, and then strategic thinking and driving for results? All those different things. Why do they go backwards? Why are they so different? I want to first point out this triangle here in the middle. Why is it critical thinking, emotional leadership, and team leadership? Or why is it arbitrator and that the entertainer and the disciple? This is what is termed in Enneagram circles, and what this is called the golden triangle. Okay, here in the middle. We can call this different elements, whatever, but it's really called the golden triangle. This is how not only do high functioning leaders, but also high functioning organizations work. I also teach this within the cultural transformation piece. It's the same model, exact same model that we work in like in organizational culture or individuals. And again, so why does it go this triangle? And why does it go one direction? The Enneagram goes one direction. If you go backwards through it is where it's creating stress. You go forward through it is where you're progressing. And I'm gonna, for example, let's take this arbitrator, that critical thinker. I'm gonna kind of combine the two to explain this. The arbitrator is that critical thinker, that individual that has the ability to really look at, they want to look at all the positive aspects. That mature arbitrator, how they look at all the aspects, that critical thinking skills. Then, so we finally come up with what it is that we know we have to do. We've compiled all this data. We've looked at all this data. Now, keep in mind, this isn't for myself. This isn't about personality. This is how we look at the picture as a leader, what's going to be best for all the people that we lead. Once we decide what that is, and we take on those mature attributes of that entertainer, which is, or as on the outer core, that emotional leader, we're taking on those mature attributes, which could be really building excitement, building, the reasons why we're going to do this, the value around what it is up here we've talked about. Now we got to create value. We've got to create value around this, not only in our minds, but for our teams. Then at that point, we take it over here to number 6. We take on those positive attributes, mature attributes of that disciple, which is really the team leader. Now, if I were to just break this down from a corporate standpoint, and this is the same thing with the individual, okay? We look at all those elements that we have. We take on the positive attributes. Why do we need to do this critical thinking? What is it about that that's going to be beneficial for all of us? Then we take it over to the team, or, how this is going to work. We have now decided as an arbitrator what it is that we got to do. We've created excitement around that. We've created the why around what we've done up here. Then we take it over to the team, or to whatever it is we need to do as a leader. And now we can explain that succinctly. We can explain what it is that we have done. We can explain the arbitrator. We can explain how we looked at all the critical thinking skills. We can develop the why around what is happening. We take on those positive attributes of that entertainer. And now we're able to put that in with the team or with ourselves. We've created that whole atmosphere of, we know what it is. We've created excitement. Now let's do something about it. Let's put this together with the team. Now we know what it is we have to do, or what we have to do as leaders, and we can implement that. Then we can go back up and take a look at it. How did we do? Problem solving 101. We look at different things like, I'm not going to, lean manufacturing or some of those things that, people talk about. That really kind of evolves around that triangle. But here's the thing. Why do we have to go in that positive direction? What happens, and I'm going to pose this question. What happens if we just, okay, we've taken a look at all this information. Let's do it. Give it to the team. Let's just do it. Here we go. There's an idea. We got this idea. I think if we do ABC, then it's, that's a good idea. So let's just give it to the team. The team takes a look at this and goes, why? Why do we have to do that? The why is missing. You forgot that step. So now if you're going backwards through the Enneagram, or you're taking on, you're going backwards, what starts happening is now you start to take on the derailing characteristics of the disciple versus taking on the mature characteristics of the entertainer. Same thing with the others. So you start to go backwards. That's where the stress starts to work. It's like watching a clock spin backwards. You watch a clock spin backwards and just something doesn't feel right. It creates stress, not only for yourself, but creates stress for your team, for the people that you're leading. It's not effective. So if you're creating stress for yourself, that stress, those immature or derailing characteristics now come out of that outer core, and those people that you're leading creates stress for them. That's why it's important to understand, you know, and this is just a triangle. Okay. How do all these others work within this? Let me show you. Let's look at the driver, for instance, or one of these others that isn't part of that 3, 6, and 9. So let's go up to, say, the driver. Okay, and the driver talks about we take on, in order to take on, improve our driver, we start to take on those mature elements of the helper and versely the communicator. Then, and why is this important to follow this path? Well, again, that's the positive attributes. We start going backwards through that. It's a backwards process. It's negative. So let me go back to the Enneagram and show you what I mean by that. Okay, talked about 8. We're talking about the driver. And in order to take on the positive elements of that, we have to go in this direction, right? The strategic thinker, that helper. Now, if you're a driver, imagine this for a minute. You're a driver, you're that high functioning driver, that person that is viewed as that heroic, that really great leader. You cannot be that. It doesn't stand alone. You can't just be that, because the helper is where you start to influence people by being that driver. You know what you've got to do. You've got to process it. You've got to accomplish. But you can't accomplish that if you're not able to include your team or the people that you lead, or for yourself. Remember, these are leadership attributes, not personality attributes. The MLEI and the Enneagram that we work with is all about leadership traits and styles. So you got to include how these impact the people that you lead. You have to include that in there. You have to make that part of the puzzle. So as we go through this, we look to the driver, and now we've got all these people that we have to include in our strategic plans, our strategic thinking. People, when we implement maybe strategic plans in the workplace, it's all about using people, right? How do we influence? How do we effectively coach these people? How do we use those elements of altruism, those elements of empathy? You can't do that. You can't be that effective driver if you don't realize the positive attributes of who the helper is. That helper is that coach, that great coach, that great person who has ability to be empathetic, altruistic, include everybody. Now, and then so on and so forth. You start taking on those positive attributes of the artist, which is really those communication skills. If you look at the outer core, and then where does that go to? Well, you're making those decisions, going over to change leadership, and you can see it just it all goes around. Everything impacts everything else. But now we have to start if we're a driver, we start taking on those positive elements. We realize that you can't be a driver if you're not a great coach. You can't be a great driver if you're not a great coach. You can't be a great driver if you don't consider the people that you're working with. You cannot consider the people you're working with if you don't have effective communication skills. You can't influence the people that you have if you're not taking on those positive attributes of the artist, and so on and so forth. But let's look at this. Okay, we're that driver. What happens if we start going backwards to the process? And remember, I said the Enneagram works in one direction. The positive attributes of the Enneagram work in one direction. And that's really, you can put that down as being clockwise. However you spin this circle is clockwise. You know, going through that, but if you go backwards through this, being that driver, okay? What if we just start to take on the thinker? We're a great driver, but one of the problems with being that thinker is we start looking at the negative attributes of that thinker. analysis through paralysis. I mean, paralysis through analysis. Not including the right people in the right place for the right reasons, that talent person. You cannot be an effective driver if you're stuck in what it is you need to be driving. You can't, does that make sense? Am I making sense? Okay. All right. So this is getting into this really deep. So that's why we look at this. What are the positive attributes? So if you look at a driver, what are the positive attributes, again, of what the helper is? Great coach, empathetic, altruistic, inclusive, versus if you're going backwards through this. That's, and so this, I'm just giving you that one example, but the point is on this is being able to move to, that's why it talks about in each one of these, in order to be that effective driver or that effective whatever, you need to take on the positive attributes of this. In turn, you need to take on the positive, the mature, I shouldn't say positive, mature attributes. Versus if you're going backwards, you start taking on the derailing characteristics of that, the one that if you start going backwards through. So if you're looking in that book, that's why the Enneagram works the way it does. Now we're getting, again, you can get into that incredibly deep. What's your individual leadership maps, traits, and things like that we don't get into here. But yeah, Claudia, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is fascinating. I can see why you teach a class of, a program for 12 hours on just on this. It's fascinating. And I was wondering if you could go back to the wheel. There's a second going outwards, inwards. There's a second wheel there that says thoughts, emotions, and behavioral something I can.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let me go back to that.
Thank you.
Okay, and let me come up to this
Yeah.
one. This is what you're
It's
talking
just-
about?
Yeah, but even if you leave the cross with the Enneagram is perfect. But and this may be in the reading, so I apologize if I'm asking you to explain something that is obvious in the reading. But on behavioral tendencies, what is the specific difference that you see between that and emotions coming out as behavior and thoughts coming out as behavior? Pieces of behavior that represent certain thoughts and pieces of behavior that represent certain emotions. So what would be the difference when you say behavioral tendencies here?
Okay, let me ask you this. What if I change this behavioral tendencies and rotated that ring around, say over here to values?
To where, excuse me?
What if I change thoughts to behavioral tendencies?
I don't know what to say.
Okay, so the point around this is the rings are movable. They're not static how you see them here, even though they're represented as being static on the wheel. It's a way we can explain things.
Okay.
So it all comes back to this one, our self-concept. How we were raised, all those are, the cultures we were raised in, the way we were raised by our parents, school, all these things that make us who we are, right? All our experiences in life, positive, negative, all those things that make us who we are, right? Which is really those elements of character that we define ourselves through: courage, humility, integrity. And if you read in the book, all those are outlined in the interpretive guide ebook. That is how we start that's how these things start coming out. What are our values? Our values around integrity, our values around, whatever that might be. How do we refer to things? How do we, look at the world? What lens do we look at the world through? Our beliefs. We all have different beliefs that we are raised on, religious or otherwise. How do those all combine with our values and references? All of those things influence how we behave.
Correct.
Not just our tendencies, but how we actually how we behave. as human beings, as as how does Claudia behave based on how Claudia was raised, her
Correct.
elements, who she sees herself, that inner lens. And so same thing with the thoughts, our thought processes, how we look at things, and our emotions around different elements. How do our emotions come into play when they influence that outer core? So all of these things, behavioral tendencies, how do we behave based on our values? How do we behave based on our beliefs? How can we behave based on how we refer to things? So, and really this, even though we showed this as this, and you see these arrows going outwards, that doesn't mean that these areas only influence strategic thinking, or this core, this triad here, or that values and thoughts influence these alone, or and inversely, beliefs and behavioral tendencies, they don't just influence these. These rotate. They're moving. They move all the time based on the situation, based on how we are raised, based on what might be the situation we're faced with. In business, it could be different crises that we look at. How do we view those different things? So, and that's how we show up as on that outer core, right? That's how we translate to these different strategic tactical competencies. It doesn't, and so I hope, does that answer your question a little better?
Yes, it does help a lot. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Okay, is that clear with everybody? Joanna, you okay? Yeah, you look like you're deep in thought there. Yep. You're on mute.
I really
Yep.
appreciate this. And I'm just noticing two things. Like, when will I get to the point where if I have a client who wants to know why it is 824125, I'm thinking that's way beyond what I could possibly respond to at this point.
And like I said, the easiest way to describe that is taking on the mature attributes of whatever that arrow is, going to the positive direction, versus taking on the immature attributes or the derailing attributes if you start going backwards. And that's where we start to create that stress. We've skipped a step, right? We miss a step in there. And that's really what this, in a lot of ways, is that's about. So again, let me reiterate this. This is we want to explain it in a simple term. Taking on the positive attributes versus taking on the negative attributes.
Okay.
You can, and there's no reason to get, I'm explaining this to you as coaches so you can maybe start doing the research or start doing understanding how that works. But however, you could put yourself in a really deep rabbit hole. You can go places you don't want to go.
Yes.
And you're going to take your client places that they're like, what did Joanna just tell me? That if I don't live in this golden triangle, that I'm despite everything else I see, I'm that I'm not that effective person. No,
That's
so,
my concern.
and
Well,
yeah, Sue, yeah.
To your point, when we were coming back of this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a marathon for you as well. So just as this is not something that we anticipate you're going to understand clearly in the beginning, and we often don't even bother to share this in the beginning of the journey because it's a lot for you to absorb. What we want you to recognize is that with anything else, there are layers that you'll be able to choose to take on as you go through it, and we'll be here to support you in your learning of it. What we want you to feel comfortable with, just like we want your coaching client to feel comfortable with, start at the very beginning, in the very simplest of the places, that it's informing where you're beginning now, so that we can begin to ask questions. And that as you go through the coaching journey, and what we see with the 7 pillars is they appear on a picture on the paper as linear, but they're not. It really is a continuous evolution. we're continuously growing and we're continuously gaining new insights and we're continuously being able to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So they may be well down into their coaching journey before the awareness of this is something that's valuable for them. We want them to begin from the simplest place, of a place that they may have not been invited to even consider before. So what we spoke about in the very beginning is the highest priority of where we focus on together, and having you understand that over time there's more that you would be able to use with them as it becomes valuable, as they go through their leadership development plan, as they then go through and are measured in Leader Watch, as they're harvesting other things out of their development plan to move on with that next phase of coaching. There will come a point in time where some of this may be of more value to them. It's just the same thing with you. As you're learning intelligent leadership, we want you to have a good understanding of the breadth of what is there and take you down into the depth of it to where you feel confident beginning the work with your coaching client. But we don't anticipate that you need to be mature in understanding these more advanced areas for quite a while.
Okay.
Does that
And-
make sense?
Yeah, no, that's really useful. And I just had one other question, I'm sorry, about references. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting references the same way. Could you just clarify what you mean by
Yeah,
that?
reference how we look at the world through any particular lens, how we refer to different things. Maybe not our individual references, but if you look at how our values, our thoughts, all those things, they really make how we refer to things, how we what kind of lens we're looking at things through. So it's not just simply references, to maybe A or B or C. It's how how all these other attributes allow us to look at things through a different lens. Does that make sense?
Could you give an example of a reference?
Sue has some great examples on
I'm
this.
going to pull up, what I'm doing is I'm pulling up some material we have on it. So Rich, why
Yep.
don't you give that while I look through where they can see some of these from the lens of the information we provide.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Let me kind of give you an example of how I'm referring to things. And I'm gonna step back in, and this is kind of going into the core purpose statement a little bit, my inner core. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, early on in my life, and I still am, I still very involved in music, but back when I first met Carole King, it was in the early 90s. I opened for her with another group. We opened for her in Sun Valley, Idaho, and living in Salt Lake in Utah, I got a chance to meet her backstage. She gave me this call. I got a call one day, and like, "This is Carole King. How you doing?" I'm like, "Who? Why are you calling me?" type thing. And she said, "Look, I've got some things coming up. Would you like to come and play with on some of these shows I've got?" And I'm like, "Oh, heck yeah, that'd be great." And not realizing what I had just done, put myself into a position where I'm playing, one of the greatest, music legends ever is asking me to come play with them. And I'm not unique in that area. She uses a lot of musicians from around, Utah and different things for different things. So it wasn't just, me exclusive. But okay, so fast forward, I'm going, learning the songs, and we'd done some rehearsing and things like that. And now we're playing at a place called Red Rocks Amphitheater in Denver, near Denver, Colorado. And if you look this place up, I had played at Red Rocks before with other people, and it's very intimidating. It's 10,000 people. And when it's full, it's 10,000 people. But instead of looking out over an audience, you're looking up at them. Okay. They're looking down at you. It's a big amphitheater. It's very intimidating place to play. And so I'm getting ready to go out and do this, and she saw that I was probably had turned white. I was scared to death. Stage fright like none other. Hands are shaking, everything. And she came over And so I'm looking at this audience. I'm looking at this giant audience of 10,000 people, full house, that I'm going to go out there and I'm going to represent, be part of one of the greatest music legends ever, who's played with, everybody. And here I am, just, Rich, and she's asked me to play with her, and I'm thinking, man, I'm just not ready for this. And I was thinking so much, what the heck did I get myself into? And it's not that I hadn't done this before. It's that I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm doing this. And she saw that. She came over and she puts her arm around me. And she says, all we have to do is go out there tonight and make one person smile and forget their day. And we've done our job. And suddenly that changed my whole reference, how I was referring to what I had to do next, to just, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. I don't have to go out there and impress everybody. I don't have to go out there. I just have to go out there with the group I'm going out there with, perform our job, work together as a team, and change the trajectory of maybe one person in that audience tonight. That's all I got to do. I just got to make one person smile, forget their day, take all that stuff off their plates. And that's my job. And so from that point on, that was one of the biggest lessons in my life. I learned a lot of things about leadership and leading people and working with teams and working with groups from those times in my life. And it changed my entire trajectory, changed the way I looked at everything, how I referred to all those things. And it took a lot of that stress off of my plate. So now I'm not referring to this whole group of people. This reference that I have is now not this giant group of people. It's one person, maybe sitting halfway up, who's had a rotten day, who's, by the time I'm done, working with these people. And it's not about me, right? It's about the team. It's not simply about me. It's about the team. It's about how we lead as a team, how we work together as a team, how we influence people as a team, not me just simply individually. Although as a leader, yes, you're going to be there. But that changed my references, how I refer to things going forward. It wasn't biting off the whole elephant or eating the whole elephant at once. I just have to reduce this to the simplest possible outcome.
And Rich, to your point with that, for us with our coaching clients, and that's an excellent story, is that each of us has a reference in our lives for different things. So we begin gathering them as we're coaching. We'll come up with stories we have. We also have what's called a reference reservoir. So we have references of other coaching clients or other examples that we put in there. And so one of the things that will happen as we're coaching is we'll have someone like Rich. He didn't have a reference reservoir for that experience. And Carol invited him into the consideration of something he could then anchor on. It wasn't his own experience, but it was one that fit for him. So as we go through in our lives and as we go through working with our coaching clients, we're going to do one of several things, is that we're going to introduce them to one that they can borrow. We're going to ask them if they know someone else who models this that they can borrow from. And then we're going to ask them what kind of reference they choose to create for themselves with this, so that they can then refer back to it in their lives and use it with others. So what it does is it gives intentionality to the concept of the value of what this is. And it's very helpful for us when we're in that messy middle of coaching, especially, and in their messy middle of the development, when they haven't quite strengthened all of their anchors and all of the pieces, and it's easy to be pulled back into that old way, because even if you didn't like it, it's the old familiar. We've probably all been there. I may not like it, but I'm used to it. That with these reference reservoirs and these kinds of things that we have the capability of sharing with them or helping them find in someone else that they can borrow from, so that they figure out what they choose to create and then use that as an anchor, then it's going to help strengthen them on their journey. Make sense? All right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good thumbs up. Okay.
So one last thing, and then I want to, before I have to leave here and turn time over to Sue. I want to show you one last thing on here. Last slide. What the heck did just happen? What are you seeing on my screen?
The wheel.
The
Law
wheel.
14.
Word. Okay. How about now?
Law 14.
Law 14. Perfect. Law 14. And there are other slides on here about each of the perfectionist traits and things like that. We're not getting it in there. I'm gonna challenge you to go look at this slide, read about those in the interpretive guide ebook, what the mature derailing, familiarize yourself with this. But this is really what it comes down to. The health and vibrancy of our inner core, your inner core, predicts the health and vibrancy of our outer core or your outer core, which is what the world sees. How do we translate who that inner core is to be that effective leader so the world sees us in that light now? We become that reference for them. We change their mindset. We change their behavior. We change their trajectory by helping them understand what their inner core is and how they refer to the world around them, how they refer to their people, their different references. I hope that answered some of your question there, Joanna. Okay, so real quick, I've got just a couple minutes. I want to go around the room and I want you to give me a 1 minute takeaway, 30 seconds to a minute takeaway from today. And then I'll turn this over to Sue and she's going to go on. And it's great that we can do this because it's a smaller group. If this was some of the other groups we'd had, we'd be 2 hours, trying to go through this. So I'm going to start.
Rich, I put a quick thing for you in the chat for you to take a glance at, and you go ahead and guide around the room. Go for it.
Okay. Okay. So I am going to. I don't know what that is, but we'll see.
Oh, well, I'll find it. It's
Okay.
about the chat.
All right. So I'm going to start as I see everybody. So I'm going to start with Fabiola. 30 seconds, 1 minute. What's your takeaway from today?
A new approach towards leadership that's actually humanizing leadership. I truly, truly love it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maddie.
For me today, the golden triangle. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm the third time going through MLEI, so it becomes clearer and clearer.
All right. Thank you. Very, very good. Claudia.
The wheel, I think, is fascinating. There's so much information. It's super attractive, and I can't wait to learn more to use it. So yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Joanna. Oh, you're on mute, Joanna.
Maybe everybody take yourself off of mute while we do this. There we
Yeah.
go.
I'm on a learning curve. I'm intrigued. I want to know more. I know this is layers. I need to be compassionate with myself and just take it one step at a time. But I'm very, very, very intrigued by all of this. Thank you.
Very good. Layers. Great explanation. And it takes time. Amelia.
Hi. As a psychologist, this was a good reminder about this tool is not a what do you say it in English? A personality test rather than an assessment. It's more for determining leadership traits, and that's good for me because I do a lot of the outer core. So having to relate the inner with the outer, I just loved it. So kudos.
All right. Thank you so much. Sue, what's your takeaway? I'm gonna include you as well.
No, go get everybody else first.
Okay. All right. Roberto.
Yes. In my case, I love this integration of Enneagram, leadership, and personality because, that's the more profound inner core. I understand that this is not a personality assessment. And we all know that in a deeper, profound part of the heart are part of the personality or the personality going ahead with this integration. Thank you. So awesome.
Thank you very much. Christine.
Yeah, we spent like a good hour and a half just on, well, what if they disagree with this or that? And my takeaway was pretty much everyone has some degree or level of resistance to an assessment, any assessment. So my takeaway is the being with the resistance, the looking for the softening. Rich, I heard you, the exercise on kind of walking them through the maturity level statements as access to, just because you might be at a lower maturity level doesn't mean we can't get access to the higher maturity levels. And, kind of just reestablishing connection and, the word you used was softening in the relationship as we give these assessments with our potential clients.
Yeah. Thank you. Great comment. Anna.
I've felt throughout this session that I'm also on the learning curve, as Joanna said. So, and I'm very much looking forward to my debrief session coming up soon, I hope.
Yes, thank you. And looking forward to that as well. So, Carlos.
Yes, hi, Rich. My main takeaway from today is as well as Anna and Joanna, okay, the learning curve. So I'm in there. And one concept I've taken with me is the importance of maturity and the maturity of each profile. So I'm eager to dig into that concept, and to know how it correlates with different profiles which are linked to that. So yeah, that's my main takeaway, to dig more into the maturity concept.
Thank you. Great. Deborah.
Lau, ¿me haces de intérprete tú mejor? Yo lo digo en español y tú en inglés.
Dale, sí.
Porque mi pronunciación no es tan buena como y fluida. Soy más lenta.
Dale. She's asking for me to translate a little bit to facilitate the communication.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bien. Yo me formé en Enneagrama ya hace varios años.
She's studied Enneagram and she's certified on Enneagram several years ago.
Nice.
Y lo que me parece interesante es la flexibilidad que va tomando para poder ayudar a otros a comprender sus tendencias en cuanto a los comportamientos y la toma de decisiones.
So she's attracted to it because it allows other people to understand why they choose to do what they do and the decision making behind it, if I'm correct. I tried to.
Yes. Yeah, outstanding. Yes, absolutely.
Y de esa manera uno poder ayudarlos a facilitar el fortalecer los talentos y el mejorar todas las áreas más débiles, no de riesgo en este caso.
So by means of that, trying to help them to strengthen their behaviors and develop the ones that are not present.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank
you, Deborah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Carolina.
Caro, ¿estás ahí?
Carolina, are you still here? She might have stepped away. We'll come back. All right. Asat.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Rich. Hi, everyone. Actually, what I got from today, actually, this is my second time. I have also participated to the meetings during the
we
week.
had a great conversation yesterday, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's now better with a core group of 14 people and with really thought-provoking questions. And so I really appreciate everyone's participation, by the way. So what I understand is with MLAI is actually before assessments, we need to make an agreement with the client, and the vulnerability decision is very important. So we have to educate the client at the very first what we are doing and why we are doing. So once that's finished, and once we have a good rapport in between and confidence and trust and the purpose that we serve, we are here for them to serve for. Then I think to start with the MLEI, this will, as a first step, will get down the barriers, hopefully, once we educate the client. And I like the way that you are expressing yourself or giving the debrief. So it's, I mean, I like replacing maturity with confidence also. It makes more of a sense to me. So yeah, everything is now more down to earth for me. Thank you. Thank you for your time and effort.
All right, thank you. And okay, I'll come back
Rick,
to Carolina.
Rick?
Yep, there you go.
Yes, sorry. But I love all the class, and I'm more comfortable looking at my like maybe my maturity gaps, or well, I have to change my language, but I'm willing to read how to be more aware of why I'm doing what I'm doing, like Deborah said. So I'm very happy. Thank you, because I think it's going to be great for us for knowing each one, and then can help our clients. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Mustafa, by the way, the last person I call on has to sing for us.
That could be, isn't it Carlos? Is Carlos going yet?
Whatever song you want to sing, that's fine.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you. So the main thing that was resonate with me, what Sue was shared around the assessment. She mentioned that it's about informing us, not identify who we are. And I feel like this is very, very powerful, especially when we are debriefing with our clients, to share that with them. I think that can resolve the problem. Like, I'm not that person that you are describing in this report. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So Sue, what's your final takeaways on this?
My final takeaway is that the energy and the excitement of the questioning of it is so fabulous, because you fundamentally understand one of the most important things about the MLEI already, which it is the application of something to complement where you're trying to support your coaching clients being in the state of being. And all of you are doing that so that they're opening up, so that they can then be receptive to things they're going to be hearing, and they could be considering where they're going to be going. And I love how you're embracing it, each of you, and the fabulous questions. And I also see that you would make a great cohort. So collectively or in smaller groups to be working together, that you've already got such a beautiful understanding because of the maturity of who you already are as coaches. And it's great because you're stepping into at a very mature level, the understanding of something you may not have even done before. And the application of it, you're already way down the road and may not realize it.
Yes, thank you so much, Sue. So I just want to my final takeaway from today, and I love working with a smaller group. I didn't get a chance, and Sue didn't get a chance to do this at the end of the last one because there's just too many. So working with a smaller group has really been kind of a great experience today. Get more feedback, more questions, more interaction here. And so I would encourage each of you to join, get into a cohort with yourselves where you can debrief these with each other, study these with each other. And I'm more than happy to help on some of those things too. I just want to make a comment that I am truly humbled to be working with so many great people from around the world, some great coaches. I don't have nearly as many years coaching experience as some of you do. Some of you, this has been your life, your whole life is coaching. You know, where I come from, operations and more executive roles in medical device, and transition over to being a coach with the help of John. But absolutely, I want to tell you that I stand in awe, and I would love if you have any comments for me, pointers. I would love to learn from you as well. So, you know, what have you experienced in your coaching journeys? What things have you learned, you know, that you can pass on that I can learn from? And truly, I stand awed. I'm truly humbled to be in your presence, because it is over the past few weeks, I got to tell you, and I talked to my wife about this quite a bit, how enriched I feel having these conversations with each of you and being able to, you know, I'm learning a lot from each of you about coaching in general, about your viewpoint on general things that work for you, tips that work for you. So again, thank you. I got to thank you for this opportunity to work with you. You know, that has been, you know, and this Santander project, again, we're going to answer a lot of questions for you this week. It's really getting to that tipping point where it's ready to kick off. It's gonna be exciting once we do. I mean, we've what a great opportunity, not only to get to network and learn from each other, but to maybe change the course of Santander, right? Let's change the course of who they are. Let's make them a better world-class organization. That's what we're gonna do. That's our goal, right? One client, one coach, one client at a time, right?
Exactly right. Well, Rich,
Yeah.
thank you very much for you're getting lots of good thank yous in there. What our next piece is, there are just a couple of components of it, very small, but of the feedback of it with the MLEI. So there are just a couple minor pieces that we haven't had a chance to close out with the MLEI before we move on to the core purpose statement. I honor the fact that it's at about the top of the hour for us. So what I'd like for you to collaboratively determine is for us to take, it's okay for us to go ahead and take a break. We don't have to finish MLEI before we do that. So would you prefer to take a 30-minute break or a 45-minute break? What time amount would you like to share? So why don't you guys unmute and decide, you know, how long would you like for us to take it for your break?
For me, 45, if everything's okay with that.
Yeah, for me as well. If we finish at 6 o'clock, is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
All right, so let's take a 45. Is there anyone that has a really good reason why we shouldn't do that? All right. Now,
Sorry, the plan is still to stop at 4 p.m. Eastern, is that right?
I will make sure we get stopped at 4 p.m. Eastern. If for any reason, I don't believe there's any reason why we won't. We have a smaller group for here, so we should be able to do that very, very easily. And I'll make sure we get stopped by 4 p.m. And again, whatever you don't have a complete understanding of in our time together, you know, you can always reach out to us. So let's take 45 minutes. It's going to be noon Eastern time. So we'll come in at 12:45 p.m. Eastern time with the core purpose, with the final couple of things with the MLEI, and then move into core purpose statement. What I'm going to do is that when we come back, I'm going to pause the recording while we're gone. Then I'll finish the MLEI. Then I'm going to stop that recording, and then we'll start another recording. So you'll have two separate. You won't have this long one big recording. Okay. So that's the plan. And thank you again, everybody, for staying with you. So.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Rich, for
Yeah,
taking
enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your day here with Sue.
I'm going to put two things in the chat based on a couple of things that we're going to talk about. And let me just pull that information up. These are things you can, whoops. It was more letters than could go into one message. So I'm making it into two messages for you. Just some things that I went ahead and pulled off the internet that provide a little bit more information about couple things we're going to talk about very quickly. We're going to go through two other components with the MLEI, and it's just talking about it in reference. You've already talked about other assessments you're familiar with. It's the MLEI doesn't replace another assessment, it complements it. Assessments, as I mentioned before, they inform us. There are more assessments than there are, Cheerios in a box. There are just a lot of assessments, and it's not that one is right or one is wrong, that each of the assessments informs us in different areas, and they give us inflection points. And what we want to maximize the potential of and the possibilities of are the inflection points that these assessments provide our coaching clients. And these inflection points don't all happen in the beginning, just like we're not immediately understanding everything that we're going through. They're inflection points that are going to continue to evolve over time with us as we work through what the coaching relationship with our coaching clients. So I'm going to share one of the things that was talked about was the different traits. And let me come in here to share. And about the bell curve and about the helper and the artist. And this is one of the slides you have, and this is some of the language that you may choose to include if they notice that their helper or their artist traits are scoring a little bit lower. And it's also an invitation. I see these as beautiful invitations for people to take things they perhaps intentionally suppressed and feel confident going ahead and expressing them more. And so this, when you have the bell-shaped curve, which, as Rich mentioned, it's not the first thing that you show your coaching clients. They don't even need to understand it in the beginning. It's something that's a little bit more granular, but it's reasonable. And what we look at is, why is something the way that it is? And so it's with the traits, the scaled mean for the majority, for 7 of them, is 36. Well, for the helper, it's 29, and they don't activate it as much as their other ones for the reasons that they might hesitate historically to show too much heart for being seen as soft or weak. And one of the things that is a great gift for us, so many people have that beautiful heart, and they haven't been taught how to apply it at work. And so because intelligent leadership is a combination of head, heart, and gut, they're going to be invited into that. And so our helping them give a place without judgment, but giving a place of permission, is it's reasonable that may not be as highly activated. And you ask questions and you learn what their relationship with it is. So whenever we see things, our questioning as coaches is to get into the relationship, the why for what it is. And with the artist, they're not as focused on their creativity or innovation and thinking outside the box, which is one of the things that we are inviting them into. For many of us, when we're in lower levels of leadership or lower levels in an organization, we're taught to go in our lane, do this, do this, do this. And it's not until we move up farther and farther and farther where thinking outside the box is more embraced. And part of what we invite people into is that, and we talk with them, what's your relationship with thinking outside the box? Are you encouraged to do that? How are you supported with that? So it's, again, I talk a lot about the context. This is a little bit of context for you if some of the things that you're seeing relate to that. And then also at a very high level, we talk about the MLEI and the MBTI. Not one is not better. It's like we're not saying you use one without the other. They could complement each other, but they both have with the 9 constructs of the MLEI, they correlate with many of the MBTI constructs, so they're not in a vacuum. This is some of the difference, though. What John talks about with the MLEI, and Rich pointed this out in the slide, this is what you've got the potential for. These are informing you what you can do, or your potential is. So it's kind of like what got you here won't necessarily get you there. And the MBTI is more preference oriented. And what the MLEI is focusing on is potential and possibilities. And then it measures us deeply inside of us, the health and the vibrancy of our self-concept, characters, values, thinking patterns, emotional makeup, those kinds of things. So it's what's going on inside that can't be seen on the outside, and looking at how we strengthen the health and vibrancy of that in support of how we're going to be seen on the outside. And then what's hugely valuable with the MLEI is it invites conversation and consideration of red flags and potential derailers. And you'll also see this language when you get into the 360 is, for example, if you're highly active in a trait that you're not very mature in, you have a chance of not using it in a very healthy way, which could potentially be derailing. So you have the opportunity to be asking questions and learning how healthy they're using something they're not very mature in. And if it's something that's important, how do we develop the maturity of it so that the fact that it's something that you've naturally got access to and you're using a lot, you're also becoming more mature in. So you've got the opportunity to strengthen that maturity. And these are things that in the questioning and as you're going through that, these are things that get placed into the individual leadership development plan so that you can focus on and prioritize that. So what we're helping point out is where there are any kinds of discrepancies and things that we want to be able to focus on. And then there's the California Psychological Index 260 and the Hogan. And again, in the context of what they are, okay, they're all looking at the internal. The MLEI and the Hogan also take a look at where our potential red flags, where our potential derailers. So it's not that one, you use one in exclusion of the other. The majority, and technically not every coach uses the CPI 260. It's not a requirement to use it. It is that often people prefer to complement what they're doing with the CPI 260. How many of you, let me just stop share for a moment. Have any of you already taken the CPI 260? Are you familiar with that? No? Okay. Well, we can talk more about that, and you can also go in and you can take it and it's another assessment. It's another decision-making assessment. You can look it up. As I said, I put some of the information about that in the chat. And so what we also don't want to do, we don't want to overwhelm our coaching clients with assessments. However, so when you're looking at the phase 1 of assessment that you might use, some coaching clients are fine doing into the IOP phase, CPI 260, the MLEI, they want all of those. What we want to make sure that we're following the rhythm of with our coaching clients, so we're asking questions about that, which all of you know about, is we're gathering the inventory of assessments they've already taken, their relationship with those assessments, how they've grown and developed from them, so that we're learning how they feel about assessments, we're learning how they work with assessments, and we're learning if they've already harvested all the potential from their assessments that they can get from it. So that when we're introducing another assessment, we've got a really good lens into how we want to position it and the value of it for them, so they don't just say, oh, well, I've done this before. This is also one of the things when we get into the STLI 360, I'll have coaching clients who'll say, oh, well, I've already done a 360. That's wonderful. I'm glad you've already got great insights into that, so that as you see the difference between what other 360s are and the customized 360 that's relevant in here from the leadership development perspective, you'll appreciate how much work has gone into this being the resource it is. And we'll get to that at another time. So what we're helping you have is the language that goes with the emotion your coaching clients have based on assessments. And you ask them in very early on in the questioning you do, what kind of assessments have you had? How do you feel about them? Do you have a mature process for walking through from the taking the assessment to the implementation of it, so that you're kind of getting a context, because that's going to guide you into how you lead into what the assessments are. So that's kind of an analysis on that. The next thing and this is the final thing that we'll talk about with the MLEI before we go into the core purpose statement, is feedback. One of the very important things about this is the feedback. And feedback is so very personalized, as you know. So I'm not really going to teach you anything here that you don't already, and with your level of seniority and maturity in what you're doing, you already know these things. But because so much of what intelligent leadership is looking at where you are and then identifying where you have the potential for going, with this kind of an assessment, and with the 360, and then with the leader watch as we go through them, John is huge on, and this was a question that came up earlier. Let me step back for just a moment. John talks a lot about the ROI of coaching. Have any of you ever had where you needed to really be able to discuss the return on investment of coaching? Okay. All right. Many programs have, we do this process, this process, this process, this process. What John talks about, and it's one of his laws, what's measured will improve. What he wants for the leader, and the leader is anyone that your coaching client is a leader. But he wants them to be able to know that it's more than just going through some steps. It's, we've got this beautiful set of pillars, and they're the different colors, and we've got these pieces, and all of that's really good. But how do we really measure your growth? How do we really measure you as a leader and where you're growing and how that's moving? So throughout intelligent leadership, there are places where you check in and you're measuring. It's also because John talks about prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. So he's got both lenses, is that he wants to measure. So where are we in the beginning? We've got the MLEI, we've got the 360. That's where we are in the beginning. This is our starting point. We've got the things they're being measured on and held accountable for. We've got the reasons they've come into coaching. So these are our starting points. And as we gather information and we put it into our individual leadership development plan from this starting point, the plan builds from there. We have clarity now where we've got access to growth, where we see our gifts and gaps, where others have perceived those, what we're being measured on and held accountable for. So we create a plan and we go coach, and then we're sharing it with others. And everything is anchored with our core purpose statement, which is what we'll get into in a moment. But everything we're doing follows the path of how do we then measure it? And a huge differentiator, people say, well, how do you extend your coaching engagement? What do you need to do for the sales process? You don't need to do a sales process for the coaching engagement to extend it if they choose to, because the Leader Watch survey is a spectacular inflection point of people seeing how all the work they've been doing is perceived by others. And we're going to be getting into that a little farther down the line. But beginning way back from where we are is we're getting clarity on where their coaching journey is beginning, both with them and with us, and then having them step into permission and feeling good about opening up, as opposed to this is not a judgment-based process. Okay. So when we're giving feedback, the power of the feedback that we're providing as we walk through is that we're getting them to have clarity on where they're beginning, what they're doing, how they're doing it. And a few of these slides are speaking again to the choir. Our reasons why this is so very helpful is that many leaders, either people don't tell them the truth, or they aren't able to really reach out to people, or they're not getting insights, or based on the relationships they're trying to be very cautious. So what we as coaches do, and when we're coming in and we're able to be a source for that, and get that valuable information. That feedback mechanism for them is so powerful, and intelligent leadership does it in a different way, in a more measured way than many other programs do, so that the leader can see that. And then as they talk about it with their constituents or with their superiors, they've got more concrete methods of sharing that information. And we talked earlier on is in that when we are early in a position, we're not taught to think outside the box. We're not taught to challenge the way things are. We're told what to do, and so we do it. Well, then, as we continue to develop in levels of leadership, more is expected of us, and there are fewer people to support us or who we feel confident we can reach out to, because we're now meant to lead some of those people that last week or last month we would have been seeking guidance from. So all of these things are reasons why we, in what we're doing as coaches, leverage the components of intelligent leadership, starting very closely with the core purpose statement and the MLEI, to help them be in the most open place to receive feedback, and receive feedback, A, because it's constructive, but B, so they're actually receiving some. And so the resources are designed to give us the best potential for giving the most valuable feedback and then doing something with it. So it's, again, it's informing and creating the inflection points. Okay. So we're taking all of the things. Are there any questions about that? Because this really feeds to everything we do throughout the rest of intelligent leadership. And pretty much, I think you were probably nodding your heads. I don't think I shared anything that you hadn't already heard before. But it just validates that it's so intentional in all the parts of intelligent leadership to keep checking in, and for us to being a reference point for our leaders. Before we move into the core purpose statement, do any of you have any questions about that information or about any of that? Is everybody good? All right, here's what I'm going to, I left my reactions on. It's like, you know, very good. All right, everybody, here we go. All right, I'm going to turn reactions off so I don't accidentally do that. Not that I don't want to tell you that I love you, but here we go. All right, I'm going to stop this recording. So when you get the recordings, you're going to get one that's specific to the MLEI, and then I'm going to start the recording again. So there's a separate recording for that. So I'm stopping this recording.